Professor Kailasa Rao. So he is here with us, and we can now hear him. And so welcome. Kailasa sir, are you there? Can you hear me? He was here, Manojit ma'am, I think.
He had joined. He's joined, ma'am.
Right. Kailasa sir, are you there? Can you hear us?
Ma'am, I think his connection is not completely this thing.
Okay, so we can wait for another 2-3 minutes, participants. So we shall resume the session soon.
Join yesterday, someone.
So now we are happy to see you here on the same platform. So shall we start, sir?
Yes, sure. Good
Let
afternoon.
me introduce you first, sir.
I'll just introduce myself with a few lines of this thing. I'm Professor Kailasa Rao, currently teaching as a professor in School of Planning and Architecture, Vijayawada. Basically, an architect who trained myself in heritage conservation, and I've been working with various government and non-government agencies, and also I'm a member of National Monuments Authority, involved with the framing of various heritage bylaws for different universities, different monuments, and of course, also my current interests are working with the various use of technologies in terms of heritage diagnostics management part of it. So generally nickname my students have nicknamed me as a drone acharya because I do use a lot of drone based kind of techniques. Today I'll just talk about what all different strategies that we have been using to understand Indian knowledge systems. Is that fine?
Yes, sir. Thank you so much for the nice introduction.
So that's the thing. From window, the entire window. Okay, share. Now, yeah. Can you see my screen now? Can you see my screen?
No,
hello?
Sir, you're sharing Gitanjali, ma'am, and now me.
Is it?
You're sharing our screen, sir.
Is it visible?
No, sir, you're sharing our screen.
So stop sharing and share it again, sir.
Yeah, okay. Just stop sharing and then screen sharing. Okay, select. Okay, enter screen. Okay, I'll use that. Not really. Window. Yeah. Can you know?
Yes, sir. It is visible now.
Okay, fine. Yeah. So I'll just start with a few background about what are the issues dealing with understanding Indian knowledge systems. I'm just looking at one aspect of it. It strikes me very hard when I read this one. Herbst writes that it looks like a huge amount of body of work is there in this part of the world, but very little seems to have been documented. When you look at your Bannister Fletcher, most of you, there are thousands of pages which are dedicated for the whole world, but whereas when it comes to eastern side, that is in India and all, where very little seems to be done. The fundamental difference, I would say that theirs was a construction by addition, but ours is a construction by subtraction. It's like, you look at a stone, they already see a building in it. You look at a wood, they see a structural element in it. So you remove the remaining and convert it into a structural member or whatever. So that's a kind of a thing. And what are the complexities of understanding is, I would say that, I'm just looking at the left side is your Uddeshwar temple, which is one of the very celebrated Bhumija temple done in 10th century. And the same thing I see, within a matter of 40-50 years in the southern side, in a small little village called, Siddheshwar temple of near Haveri. Same kind of a configuration, stellar configuration, which is done in a miniature. What I'm trying to tell you, just to give an idea what is a miniature, I'm just showing you this water bottle. That's a level. How do such a complex geometries are translated, whether it is a Khajuraho temple You see that in a small Tiluvalli Shanteshwar temple, same ideas are translated. Now, what I'm trying to explain you is that these kind of an ideas, which are very complex, complicated geometries, which was never understood by Westerners, how in 1,000 years back, such a things have been translated from one to the other. I mean, whether you can really look at this kind of a double-storied typologies or a star-shaped typologies. This is one place called Dambala Dodavasappa kind of thing. How such kind of a interesting ideas were generated, whether it is this kind of a multi-level wells which are there, or some wells which are done in terms of a certain kind of a open plan kind of temple, which is unfolding of a temple kind of a thing. You can see that variety of ideas, or such kind of a subterranean structures which are using all kind of a understanding about geology, geography, materiality, and all those things. How such complex ideas were generated, and how such ideas were conveyed, and how such ideas are converted into building. That is my crux of looking at the Indian knowledge systems. A complex geometrical, of course, I'm just looking at geometry. There are many other aspects which are other than geometry, like you have spiritual aspects of it, mythological aspects of it, and other kind of things. I'm not touching upon it, but only looking at this kind of complex ideas. Now, how I got into this understanding or looking at it is when I was doing this kind of around 20 years back, a digital documentation. In those days, digital documentation is doing in AutoCAD. That was the thing. That was the time we were trying to look at variety of this kind of a temple very detailed way. Not normally it was not that easy to document it, because this is one of the structure which has almost collapsed. So we really have to document as is various kind of a condition of it. So I mean, most of the times, like, it was very difficult, impossible to do elevation as it is, because a column is tilted, that various positions have gone or eroded, dilapidated. How do you represent as it is? Because extremely difficult. But at the most, we used to draw it and put a condition assessment kind of thing. That was my basic training as a conservation architect. But when I really looked into the actual geometry of it, when I tried to make some kind of a three-dimensional meshes, I realized that so many million lines are there. It is very, very impossible for anybody to actually document very accurately these kind of things without any, without any modern technologies. But sheer geometry itself is very distinct. I mean, this is the kind of a, normally we should take 6 to 8 months to at a site to just measure a building. This is the kind of a normal measurement books, which is field note books, used to ended up with this kind of a complex, because you cannot assume anything as a straight line. Everything has to be fixed with the three benchmarks, and from there all the triangulated kind of things we used to do it. But when I used to see the actual publications of many people, it used to be either very oversimplified approach, or whether a rudimentary one, or too cryptic, like these kind of things. These are okay for some sort of a understanding at a a conceptual idea, but to understand the whole complicated genre and how they have an evolution, lot more detailed understanding is there. So Adam Henry's work has been quite helpful in terms of understanding what are the genres, how the kind of a deviation starts. Okay, this is for example ABCD. This is typical way of southern genre, and then how the central Indian, or rather like the Vesara, what we call it, how it has deviated, especially in the places of Karnataka. So we have fairly good understanding about the temple, its components, its configurations, its deviation. But in terms of a constructional understanding of it, is very, very limited work which has happened. Because if you look at this little plinth of it, or a jagati of a temple, you look at it, all these small little cavities or grooves are part of the design. They are not accidentally opened up or some kind of thing. And if you look at the typical construction yard of a temple, these are the kind of a thing that you see. All stones that you see there, none of them are same. They are all different. It's unlike a brickwork where all bricks are same. You just have to, according to geometry, lay it and then plaster it. Here there is no such thing. Every stone is part of a designated place. And all these things is done sometimes in a quarries which is far away. Now, how do you do it and bring it, assemble it with such an accuracy? You can see the kind of a joinery detail is so small little mms. So just to look at this kind of a knowledge, the knowledge of how you conceive an idea, how you convey an idea, because you have to convey this idea to some 100 sculptors or 200 sculptors. Not one person cannot do everything. Because all this, and then there has to be very less ambiguity. Very complex structures, if you leave it to them, everybody does something else and you cannot assemble it. So it's all assembly. It's not even some sort of a masonry kind of a thing. And how to do it. So I just took some examples of it to underlay the understanding part of it. First is to how do you really understand this overall geometry. For that one, we were trying various techniques of some rectified photography, where all the photographs of buildings were taken and they are all joined together, removing the barrel distortion, and then putting them together under a certain same scale, and then finally we tried to reassemble it, but it was not really working. Like if you put all 4 elevations on 4 sides, the building should work. It doesn't work. But then you just join at every level. Then I remove the textures. It looks very, very shabby. In the sense, like the whole approach of creation was not actually not even assembly, but the creation was through certain kind of a technique of perhaps what we use in a current context in computers is computational approach. For example, if you take a profile and if you rotate it, this is formed. If you take a octagon or some different sided one, different forms are generated. In the sense, like they're created, not generated, rather than drawn and developed. So this is the kind of, to prove this understanding, we had to use different techniques. One is the simple manual methods, which of course if the structure is within 10 by 10 meters and the measurements are within hundreds, then I think manual will do. Suppose if this small structure, but the number of measurement that you have to take is 1,000 or 10,000 or a lakh or above, then you need to go with the terrestrial photogrammetry or laser scanning and close range scanning kind of thing. If the object is large and then complexity is more, then you may have to go with the aerial photogrammetry, laser scanning, satellite. Except for satellite, remaining everything we tried it out and to understand this. These are some techniques we started using, like a tachometric laser scans. Am I audible? My screen is visible?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Yes,
It is.
Yeah. Please, if there is any, sometimes lag or something, do let me know.
sure, sir. Sure.
So you're still on slide 2.
On slide 2, oh my goodness, that you should have told me. I'm already to reach 29.
No, sir.
Now it is moving, sir.
Now it's moving.
Oh, when I put it in the slideshow, it was not
Sir,
done. So,
yeah, so escape full screen, sir, and then it will be this thing.
okay, now is it visible? Is it moving?
Sir, you have,
all the while I was talking.
You have
Now?
to share the screen, sir, again.
yes, sir, you have to.
Okay. Now?
Yeah, it is visible now, sir.
Okay. I think I was all the while I was talking something which I think none of you were really looking at it. So I might just go back quickly. I mean, this you have seen slide 3 has come.
Second. Yes, sir.
Slide 3.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay. I think I must have really sounded like without any. So this is the one which I was talking about. How such kind of a complex idea was conveyed without drawings 2,000 kilometers away to another area. This is a small little temple which a miniature which has been done. This is a Bhumija's type of it. Now can you see it now? Yeah. Now I changed the slides. Can you see it?
Yes, sir. Yes, it's moving.
Yeah. So when I put it in the slideshow, it is not moving, I suppose.
Yeah, and this generally happens, sir.
Okay. I'm sorry for it. Yeah, please do let me know. Can I'm slide 4? I'm okay. These are the different types of temples that I took it. Okay. Then of course this is a double-story typologies which are known in Karnataka. I know Vesara kind of a style, or this kind of a star-shaped types of typologies, or this kind of subterranean subterranean tanks. You can call it as temples. You can call it. That's a kind of a thing which you can really see. Okay. And then you can see the or some such kind of a tanks which are very complex structures, retention walls that you have to do it 7 floors down, or this kind of a very intricate detailing. Now the slides are moving, now.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
These kind of very, these are all, later, early Kalyani Chalukya temples of 9th, 10th century. You can see the level of detailing, such a complex details. And of course, I was talking about it, my initial level of documentation using this kind of a CAD systems. But actually, if you look at it, this is the level of details that it has got. So this is what I was trying to talk about it. It takes million dimensions to make such kind of a drawings. And then, I mean, this is the normally used to take 6 to 8 months to do one documentation of temple, and this is the kind of field notebook that we used to have it like a. You can't trust any line as a straight line, so you have to create a benchmarks, and from there all the triangulated levels you can develop and do it. But when it comes to the publications, you can see that either oversimplified approach like this, or very age-old drawings, or very cryptic, these kind of things like mandala types. But in reality, I mean, of course, I was also talking about what Professor Adam had his work in terms of like how the configuration of a temple architecture and its deviations and its components, that much is done. But what happens is about this level of work. You can see that little plinth of it, like I mean, it's almost like this very small micro level of detailing that you see is part of the design actually, and this is the typical construction yard that you see. This is the thing. No two stones are same. That's the kind of a thing. So understand it. I think I took up this region, and the objective is to how such kind of a complex ideas were generated. First is conceived, then they have to be generated and conveyed and constructed. Now, conceptualize itself is very important. So, for example, these are the initial techniques of documentation. We were trying to do it other than manual, maybe rectified photography kind of a thing, but it doesn't really work. This if you really look at it, I mean, by just adding all side 4 elevations, you cannot make a building. This is a classic example. So there must have been different approach altogether. This must be generative logic that you can see. Now the slides are moving now.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So this is the kind of a different type of strategies we were using it to. Right. This is like the object is within 10 meters by 10 meters, and the measurements are within 100. You can do a hand measurement. If the object is small, but the measurements you have to go for more than a 10,000 or 1,000, then you have to use these techniques of terrestrial photogrammetry, laser scanning, and other kind. If the object is very large, 1 kilometer per kilometer, then you have to go with the satellite and airborne kind of. So initially we were using, I mean, one of the tachometric techniques which we started was laser-based ones. Basically, it produces some such of a, this kind of a point cloud data. So with this point cloud data, it is, in terms of like you have a, I mean, from point to point, you can measure the distances, and it's much more comprehensive. The other one which we started using, of course, that was very expensive. We started using something like a Xbox kind of a thing. I mean, of course, it works only in the clouded conditions or night times. Day times is very difficult because it's very sensitive to heat. So with that one, we could realize that I mean, actually you can not looking at a 2-dimensional approach, but getting the complete 3-dimensional idea about the whole I mean aspect that you can get. So there was limitation. We could only scan some 3 meters by 3 meters. So we used to assemble the whole thing and make a larger this thing. The data acquired was the points, in the sense like you from let's say every 1 mm you collected data, and then you start processing the data, which is using either photogrammetric techniques or laser scanning or tachometric techniques. So this is the point cloud data that we have. Then you process it into slightly denser data. So you can see that it is almost like 1 crore 12 lakh points of a XYZ coordinates have been collected in a points, and then you convert it into a mesh using different softwares, and then overall you overlay the imagery over it and get it. So this is the kind of a techniques that we started using. Now with this one, we could get a little bit more detailed understanding that you are not looking at a building just as a plan or elevation or a section. You are acquiring the entire 3-dimensional information, because what we realize that these such buildings cannot be understood just using plans or elevations or sections. It has to be in totality. Got my point? Because the plan here is different, and let's say plan at a higher level is totally different, isn't it? It cannot be understood like a plan elevation or section. Plan elevation sections are modern tools of conveying your idea to to construction site, but But can you conceive an idea through that one is a question that we have. I mean, or let's say, I mean, if you look at it, every level, the sections are different. If you look at it at different levels, it is quite different from the other side of it. So all these kind of things have to be really looked into. So of course, we also have to be very critical about technology. Everything that can be done with technology always has to cross-check it. So whatever that I acquired as a this thing always has to be cross-checked it there. And sometimes, even to cross-check whether what you have seen screen and what you are getting as an end product, whether it is same or not. We used to even, 3D print and check it. Okay, it is not only a make-believe thing. So that is the kind of a details that we got into. Now the idea of how they were conceived, I was trying to understand it. Perhaps one way is looking at it is trying to get a profile approaches. They don't do the entire drawing elevation and everything. Just cut a profile, rotate it, and you get it. Or maybe you take different paths, like for example, circle or some sort of a this thing. So this is what I acquired using a scan data, and I deduce the data and try to see whether it can be matchable with the. It was perfectly matching in the sense like any complex kind of a detail like this, you keep changing the paths and profiles, and you can really achieve a very complicated kind of details like this. Whether it was only whether it's an element level or whether it is at a building level. Let's say, for example, just at a component of facade when I try to take it, every course is so varied. I could really see that it is part of the profile, which otherwise in normal methods I couldn't have understood it. But whether I can recreate it using a certain kind of a simple algorithms, if I can call it, yes, it is possible. And I saw that same kind of a approach in the floor drawings of many such temples. To put this theory to testing, we took different components, whether it's a plinth of a particular temple. You really look at this particular temple, Kashi Vishwanath temple. You have a one place called Lakkundi in Karnataka. You see at the upper level plan is different, and if you look at the lower level, the courses are quite different, and they seamlessly go and join it. This is the scan data. Now I took that particular scan data and started, cutting in different profiles, and finally I could reduce the whole data into these two profiles. And when I, revolve this whole listing in your software, exactly same kind of a, this thing happened. I have not changed. It's not like I do the lower base first, this base, and this every course. It's just generative approach with it. It worked very well. And whether to see what is what they have done and what they have done matching, I match both the meshes. You can see that what you see in the blue is acquired data done in 11th century with the scan. And what you see in this lower level is a generated data using a computer. When I really look at it, every line matches, including the small little grooves. The little corner tips is all so well fits into it. That means these guys had a method of certain kind of computing. So test the theory at a larger scale. I took the overall building of a temple, Haveri, this thing, and reduced the data into certain kind of a smaller these things, and then started working in your basic using softwares kind of a thing. It perfectly looks like they had a, used a certain kind of a computing. Now, do not get confused the computing and computers. Computing is an approach. You don't draw, you generate it. So that's a kind of an approach it is. It is not exactly, you draw a plan and, work out an elevation. It is not that kind of an approach. It's not drawing based, it is generative approach. So theoretically, it seems to be matching in my computer, but I have to test the theory whether it is matches or not. So how do I do it? I scan a building, okay, and I generate a building using a certain kind of a method of whatever I showed is a profile approach, and then match both the meshes. You can see that, of course, a little erosion and distortions are there because of the vagaries of the nature, but otherwise every line that it really matches. So tested the theory for even star-shaped temples also, a temple called Doddabasappa temple. Now the slides are moving, and slide number 62.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So this is the kind of a, very interesting kind of temple. In fact, Professor Adamadi thinks that this must have been the genesis of all the, temples of Bhumija and northern side. because this is a kind of an approach what they did. So using whatever the tachometric techniques, these things, we tried it out, and then different layers of every course has been more, checked under the scan data. This is the scan data sliced at a generative level, and then understood various logical configurations of it, how much of the reduction factors and how it can be done. So we tried it out, and it really, interestingly worked like, I could generate the whole structure without actually drawing it, and with a pinpoint accuracy of every line. So that means our traditional knowledge systems had lots of this kind of approaches where you can create, conceive, create and translate these ideas, such a complex geometries without much of a, the current day, this kind of a drawings. If you really have to make a working drawings for it, maybe it may cross some, 5,000 or 6,000 drawings. But how could these place Tapatis were doing it so, effortlessly? So for each of these things, there seems to have a strategy for it, and conveying these ones. So that's the thing, and it can be broken into every course level of detail. In the sense, like one course when it's done, automatically generate the second level course, particular next seam line. So of course, this I have tried it out various other things with the Professor Adam Hardy. We tried out, of course, that is a time around 8-9 years back. Some of the things like the drone-based approaches also we could do it, because at a ground level it was very difficult to assess the roof plans of these ones. Impossible to actually draw a roof plan of this temple. But with this kind of an approach, we did using this one, not exactly photograph, but using point cloud data that I showed you, how we processed it, could generate it. Now it's giving a lot of new ideas that they have actually generative logic for it. So we could really reconstruct a variety of these kind of structures using these kind of technologies. Again, another temple, Jasmalnath temple in Asoda, Gujarat, one of the Solanki period temple of a 10th, 11th century work. Perhaps maybe a lot has been learned by this Khajuraho group of temples from these kind of temples, multi-Shekari temples, which is called as Anekandaka kind of a temple. So we could really, understand the various facets of it. Now, once I do it, I put it into orthographic mode, not into perspective mode. Lots of original ideas, what they might have done, started, appearing to us. Whatever the most important aspect to actually conceiving a building from the top to bottom. This is my opinion, that they always conceive from top to bottom. So this is the kind of a roof plans which otherwise wouldn't have been impossible for us to generate it. They look similar, but there are a lot of variations. They have tried it out. From one configuration to other configuration. A lot of this kind of proliferation of these kind of forms have been done. So what I'm trying to convey, that these kind of ideas which they have generated thousands of years back, at least 1,000 years back. Most of them are 9th, 10th century. We'll look at it. Another temple called Taranga Temple in Rajasthan, which we could use with this kind of data that we may acquire. It was completely revelations for what level of complexity that they have done it, just using a simple logic and taking it forward in a very complicated way. So that's kind of thing. So this is the kind of a scan data that I'm showing it to you. The moment you take it into a computational understanding level, things can be very, very interesting, and new understanding is emerging how they have developed such complex models using this thing. So of course, this once after doing it, I also started using it extensively in different areas. One of them is that the ghats of Varanasi. Of course, I did around 5.5 kilometers running length of Varanasi ghats. That is for a different purpose, not exactly to understand logic of construction, but more for assessing the complex nature of these ghats, identifying different layers, so that how it can be restored, how it can be managed with such a kind of complexity of thousands and lakhs of people gather there. So to assess it, you needed a very detailed level of studies for it. So once you have a detailed understanding, then only your interventions can be good. Now we started a program in SPA Vijayawada with all this, introduction of various new techniques, strategies to understand the heritage with a techno-based approach. One part of it is to understand the computational logic and everything. Other one is using these tools as a very strong diagnostic tools to for a detailed assessment of buildings, monuments, large areas, urban fabrics, and other kind of things. So these are the things that I've been kind of working on to these areas. And of course, these are all, of course, integrated with the new geo references, with the, whether it is a, matching with the georeferencing or at every level, or even in terms of assessment of every little point of it. So that's the kind of a thing. For example, so quantification, various things, very realistically we can do it. Lastly, I can show that what really doing with these kind of a complex structures on ground is that, imagine this is that 11th century work, and overall this is the kind of a restoration somebody has done. No respect for the original understanding of it. We somewhere lost this whole idea and not thickly painting with this kind of a, this thing, hiding all the details, destroying this one, or there's a lot of renovations that happens unsympathetically without even, caring about the original idea, what so complex, wonderful ideas, and just with some sort of bathroom tiles or some kind of a granite cladding, or insensitive additions without even knowing the original geometry. This is very unfortunate that this kind of a very, I can only say that insensitive ideas, lack of understanding, because they never understood. We have not understood our own genre of temples, the various complexities that are involved, and then eventually making such a mockery of such. So, in a nutshell, what I was trying to give you is that to understand Indian traditional architecture, just one small example of Indian temples, and try to explain the various complex geometries that it has got, and how to really look into it using a computational understanding part of it. So that's the kind of a thing. And with all these data are not just only for understanding purpose, but then once you have these data, you can really do a lot more detailed assessment of it, its condition, and very accurately. When once you have this kind of a, let's say, a very strong orthomosaic informations, you can really create a quite quite interesting levels of data which we can take it forward for various other applications. So that's the kind of thing. Hope I could make some introduction to various approaches of looking at these traditional buildings with a few examples that I could take. Okay. Thank you very much. And if we can, maybe we can take up any question and answers if we can.
Yeah, I request participants, if you have any questions, ask us to unmute you, and or either you can put your queries in the chat box. I have a question, sir.
Please.
So, which software or computational method you have used to do all this exercise?
Yeah, initially I used LIDAR, that is a laser scanners, LIDAR, ones, which is we have acquired a 350 meters range LIDAR equipment now. So that is the one. And for other ones like reality capture kind of a thing, or GeoMagic is another one which we use it, and these are the kind of ones. Sometimes, like, there are a lot of open source ones which, when we started off, in fact literally started growing with these technologies, because initially they were very rudimentary. Slowly, even with the iPhone, people can do that kind of scanning. iPhone I think 13 or 14 has got that kind of a thing. So what I can tell you is that one is acquiring the data, the other one is processing and understanding the data for our various applications part of it. initially they all must have been started by the reverse engineering guys. The Chinese must have used it like, one product is there, scan it and make a replica of it. But now I used it for purpose of understanding the heritage component of it. Now I think we are extensively using it, training our students, and at a master's level, and we-
But sir, how can we involve our students, because we do have some of the heritage sites over here around Chandigarh University.
Hmm.
But sir, we don't have skilled people who can. We have the LiDAR over here, Chandigarh University Civil Engineering Department. They are using it. But how can we make our students and faculty acquainted with the software or the tool, whatever you were referring to?
Okay, one is it's like learning swimming. एक बार छलांग लगा देना चाहिए पानी में.
Yeah, correct, sir.
So I mean, when I imagine I started at a very late age, around हम लोग वो पूरा मैनुअल ड्राफ्टिंग से निकले हुए इंसान हैं. बाद में धीरे धीरे AutoCAD उससे आते आते हुए, then I mean this was necessity, हमको जरूरी पड़ा. When I realized that इतना कॉम्प्लेक्स चीजों को आप मैन्युअली कर नहीं पाएंगे. एक टेम्पल को मतलब 6 महीने पूरा मेजर करो, आने के बाद ड्राफ्ट करते वक्त एक डाटा मिसिंग है तो पूरा go back to the speed. So then it was necessity. So in fact, I have seen every time and new software, new technology comes in, पुराना आपको कोई मायने नहीं रखेगा. So you have to keep on trying it out. सही बताऊं तो YouTube में बहुत सीखा मैंने आज भी. So just take it hands, take it to the field, try it out. There will be 100 failures, but every failure will teach you something. आपके पास डेटा है तो सीधा आपका अपना कॉलेज से शुरू कीजिए, कोई 50 मीटर रेडियस से शुरू कर लीजिए डेटा. Then I think all these things are third party softwares वगैरह रहेंगे. डेटा फीड करके when you start merging these data, that's where you start realizing that आपको acquire करते वक्त और थोड़ा सावधानी पड़नी पड़ेगी, ज्यादा ओवरलैप्स निकालना पड़ेंगे. इस तरह से hands on है, हो जाना चाहिए, हो जाएगा. I think this generation kids are very smart, they can pick it up very easily.
Yes. तो एक चीज और पूछनी थी, जैसे मेजरमेंट तो लाइडार से होगी, जो मटेरियल्स का है, मतलब हाउ वुड यू बी एबल टू अंडरस्टैंड द मटेरियल टाइप्स एंड हाउ ओल्ड इट इज and every information related to the material, so how we could fetch that data and how we can do that?
lidar से जितने भी मैंने टैकोमेट्रिक टेक्निक्स दिखाए हैं, ओनली सरफेस लेवल डेटा देता है. सरफेस मतलब मैपिंग कर लेता है वो पूरा, गिव्स अ वेरी एक्यूरेट सरफेस मैपिंग. तो सेकंड वन इज टू अंडरस्टैंड हाउ ओल्ड इट इज एंड ऑल. आपको डोमेन नॉलेज चाहिए. सी फॉर एग्जांपल उस रीजन का है, उस रीजन में मान लीजिए द स्टोन स्ट्रक्चर, स्टोन के है, जैसे मंदिर है. So based on the type of material, whether it is a sand, क्या material था, किस तरह से था. Then looking at the workmanship, looking at the what kind of styles which were prevalent in those days. ये domain knowledge है. For example, a lot of work has just happened by various people who has done the study of let's say एक genre का टेम्पल का है, डिफेंस आर्किटेक्चर है, फोर्टिफिकेशन का है. जितने में उन्होंने बहुत सारे स्टडीज किए हैं, बेस्ड ऑन एपिग्राफिक स्टडीज हो सकते हैं, डिपेंडिंग अपॉन द कंस्ट्रक्शन टेक्निक्स के बेस्ड होते हैं. ये पूरा जोड़ के एक ओवरऑल अंडरस्टैंडिंग डेवलप करनी चाहिए. एक चीज से वी डोंट गेट एवरीथिंग. फॉर एग्जांपल जस्ट बाय हैविंग ए ऑन सरफेस डाटा आपसे कुछ नहीं होगा. आपको एनालाइज करने के लिए एक तो डोमेन नॉलेज, ओके स्टाइलिस्टिकली क्या था, 10th सेंचुरी में क्या था, 11th सेंचुरी में क्या था, 12th सेंचुरी में क्या था, हाउ दिस styles have grown over a period of time. ये आपको लिटरेचर से मिलेंगे या जितने भी स्कॉलरली वर्क्स हैं उससे आपको स्टडी करना पड़ेगा. There are other things like some very old ones, शायद आपको जिस तरह से other tests like using कार्बन डेटिंग वगैरह कर सकते हैं, लेकिन कार्बन डेटिंग करने के लिए आपको कार्बन चाहिए उसमें. जैसे कोई ऑर्गेनिक मटेरियल हो तब जाके पता चलेगा. अब स्टोन का कार्बन डेटिंग नहीं कर सकते क्योंकि इट्स ये है. तो इसको पूरा स्टाइलिस्टिक बेसिस और अदर क्या कहते हैं कोलैबोरेटिव एविडेंसेस के साथ आप जोड़ के जब पढ़ोगे, then it will come. For example, is even to scan these temples, initially I gave it to some professionals like जो lidar के जो outsourcing वाले थे. They used to simply scan it and dump lot of data onto us. But then I realized that our own understanding of that particular architecture, if you have it earlier, then it's much easier to, assess it much easier. So it's a combined effort here, madam.
The entire exercise would help us in either one is the repository and the documentation.
Yeah.
The second would be preservation and restoration.
Yes, yes.
What else have that data and that work help us in?
For example, different context में कभी था एक I did one of the 3rd century BCE का एक excavation site का था, उसमें it's a jigsaw puzzle जैसा पड़ा हुआ है, it's a huge thousands of stones excavated site से निकले हैं. अब उसको कुछ भी हाथ लगाने से पहले this kind of data was very helpful to reconstruct it virtually. क्या था ऐसे इस तरह के कई सारे, एक और था आशापुरी जैसे टेम्पल पे जहाँ पे मेरे बाकी दोस्त भी काम किए, एसपी भोपाल के विशाखा कावतेकर वगैरह काम किए हैं, इन्होंने उनके साथ भी मैंने काम किया, उनके साथ प्रोफेसर एडम हेडी के साथ. तो ऑल दिस डेटा वर दैट टाइम वी यूजिंग इट फॉर अ वर्चुअल रिकंस्ट्रक्शन, क्योंकि आप फिजिकली अगर करने जाओगे तो कुछ गलत हो गया, गड़बड़ हो जाएगा, बट दिस इज मच सेफर मेथड. द अदर काइंड ऑफ एप्लीकेशंस आर कंडीशन असेसमेंट के लिए. अभी बहुत सारा लार्ज एरिया है, जैसे वाराणसी मैंने दिखाया, उसका असेसमेंट करने के लिए घाट्स किस तरह से है, लेवल्स क्या है, कहाँ सिंक हुए हैं, कहाँ उसका ये है, तो बहुत सारा असेसमेंट के लिए काफी यूजफुल है. अभी कुछ सिटी लेवल का किए हमने, एक वारंगल फोर्ट का किया था हमने रिसेंटली लास्ट स्टूडियो में. इट्स अराउंड 2 kilometers by 2 kilometers area, large fortification, and there's a lot of houses are there, currently there are population living there, and there's archaeological sites are there, then there is a water bodies are there. इन सब को परफेक्ट मैपिंग करना बाकी सिस्टम्स में बहुत मुश्किल था. अब टोटल स्टेशन से करोगे तो सिर्फ पॉइंट टू पॉइंट मिलता है, ये पूरा सरफेस लेवल असेसमेंट के लिए बहुत आसानी था. प्लानिंग करने के लिए अर्बन लेवल अर्बन प्लानिंग एप्लीकेशन है, अर्बन डिजाइन एप्लीकेशन है, लैंडस्केप के लिए एप्लीकेशन है, पूरे जो हमारे पूरे सेटलमेंट मैनेजमेंट के लिए बहुत सारा एप्लीकेशन है. अब फॉर एग्जांपल ट्रांसफॉर्मेशन देखना है आज का इस तरह से, मान लीजिए 10 years के बाद फिर से आप अगर मैप करके देखो कितना चेंजेस हुए उधर से इधर, विद अ वेरी गुड ट्रेंड्स को. सो आई एम श्योर वंस वी नो हाउ टू capture the information, it's all information based decision that we have to do it. Informed decisions हम लोगों को करना है. If you have accurate information, your assessment will be correct. आपका diagnosis ठीक है तो treatment रहेगा. अगर आपका diagnosis ही assumption पे बेस है तो थोड़ा गड़बड़ हो सकता है. ये इस मामले में I can see a huge application base for this.
Sir, you talked about Bhumija temples.
जी.
So actually, sir, we had Dr. Shikha also in 3rd day of our MTV. So she was also talking about Bhumij temples. But sir, most of them are located in Madhya Pradesh. Ashapuri you were discussing, so she was also discussing Ashapuri case. And so what sir information you, specifically could drive and could transfer to the generation regarding this specific temple types?
I'll just quickly एक छोटा सा अभी मेरे ख्याल से मेरा एक I'll just open one of the paper which we are working. I'll just show let me open that.
Sure, sir.
I'll just share that. I'll just share.
Sure.
Share screen. Window. Entire screen. Okay. Can you see the screen now?
Yes, sir.
हाँ, अब देख लीजिए ये करंट वर्क ऑफ प्रोफेसर एडम हार्डी का था, which is from the text to temples. For example, अब एक श्लोक है जिस तरह से अगर सम्रांगण सूत्रधार है वगैरह, उसमें एक टेक्स्ट है कि मान लीजिए okay, how the whole plan description is there. The width of 16 amshas and the karnas, ये पूरा जो है कौन सा component है, कितना subdivision है, इस तरह से पूरा का temple का description आपको इसमें मिल जाएगा. तो उसको translation के लिए प्रोफेसर एडम हार्डी has used it, like for example एक तो स्क्वायर लिया, उसको कितने डिविजन्स हुए, उसका किस तरह से वर्टिकल डेवलप किया. तो इसका डिफरेंट थिंग्स एज पर टू द टेक्स्ट व्हिच आर लाइक अपराध से पूछा वगैरह हुआ. तो ये था टेक्स्ट वाला बात, टेक्स्ट टू कन्वर्टिंग इनटू. अब दिस इज व्हाट आई हैव गिवन टू हिम इन टर्म्स ऑफ एलिवेशन. एग्जैक्टली बेस्ड ऑन दिस वन he can really, now this is text based है अभी. If I really look at, just show that one. Yeah, these are the text based one, and to cross check whether really text follow हुआ है कितना हुआ है, this is my photogrammetric analysis का area था. In reality on ground क्या हुआ है, can you see this now?
Yes.
Yeah. So now how much of a subdivisions happens at a in a plan, how much happens in the vertical, what really happened. कई सारे बार ये दिखने लगे हैं कि एक भूमिजा का हमने this is before I evaluated this temple. This is what Professor Adam Hardy has seen it and done the entire भूमिजा का जो configurations है text based है. But in reality, when they tried to measure it, it was not matching, or a lot of anomalies were there. So these are the kind of a text based one. And after this, if you can see this, the one which I gave, this is the scan that I did it. In fact, sir has been very kind to give my acknowledgement in the paper that these are the photogrammetric models developed by Kailasa Rao. So इस पे जब उन्होंने analyze करना शुरू किया, exact locations of it, pinpoint accuracy के साथ उनको मिलने लगे. हाँ, of course थोड़ा बहुत you can see that center exactly यहाँ पे ये center नहीं match कर रहा है, आपको लगेगा, but that is a constructional error. शायद वो top वाला जो पिनियल जो है वो कलर्स जो है थोड़ा शिफ्ट हुआ है. एग्जैक्ट लेवल ऑफ इट और इवन इन टर्म्स ऑफ वर्टिकल लेवल आज तक जितने भी एनालिसिस किए हैं इसका मोस्ट ऑथेंटिक रियलिस्टिक इंफॉर्मेशन मिलने लगा. नाउ you can, with this basis you can really look at back the texts and how those kind of a changes have happened, how these different genres have been worked out. It's becoming much easier. So this is what I could, that is it.
The title is written as dependence and freedom in Indian temple architecture. So what does this mean?
Yeah, for example, क्या आप कितना निर्भर कर सकते हैं टेक्स्ट पे. जितना भी अपना जितना भी आर्किटेक्चर जो दिखेगा, जो ट्रेडिशनल टेम्पल आर्किटेक्चर आपको ड्राइंग बेस्ड नहीं दिखेगा, आपको कहीं ड्राइंग्स नहीं दिखेंगे एक्सेप्ट आशापुरी में कुछ दिखे हैं. दैट इज ट्रांसलेटेड फ्रॉम दिस आइडियाज, यू हैव टू ट्रांसलेट इट. अगर इनफैक्ट आई कुड से दैट आवर इंडियन आर्किटेक्चर इज वन ऑफ द मोस्ट सोफिस्टिकेटेड. आज को जितने भी हम लोग हैं जो तो पैरामीट्रिक्स जो कह रहे हैं या फिर जस्ट कंप्यूटेशनल आइडियाज है, nobody draws them. You set the parameters and generate an idea, right? That's what is currently it is done. ये आज के 21st सेंचुरी की बात हो रही है. यहाँ पे आप 9th 10th सेंचुरी में लोग करके दिखा दिए हैं. तो अगर उसमें भी उनका ये मैंने कहना था कि आप कितना टेक्स्ट पे यू कैन डिपेंड आने, कितना स्थापत्य अपना इंटरप्रेट कर सकता है. सी, एक तो आप अगर इस टेक्स्ट को डायरेक्टली ट्रांसलेट करके मंदिर नहीं बना सकते, उसको you also should have lot of your own domain knowledge, lot of other skill sets to interpret them and create variety, generate variety of different configurations develop करने की बात है. So that's what I could understand from it. I do see I have done more than 1800 temples, very detailed scans of it. I have, let me tell you, there are no two ones are same. बगल में बने हैं, सेम बने हैं, but इतना वेरिएशन, but I can see that how they were thinking. So इतना सारा वेरिएशंस कैसे ला सकते हैं आप, ये पॉसिबल है, मुमकिन है, because you have to think in certain kind of an approach. ये जो हमारा जो the plan level, I'm just talking about form. I mean, I'm not going into the other thing. Form generative approaches में आपको ये जो आपका टी स्क्वायर सेट स्क्वायर का अप्रोच में नहीं होगा, इसके लिए आपको कॉन्फ़िगरेशन लेवल पे सोचना पड़ेगा. ये मेरा मानना है।
सर एक मेरा क्वेश्चन और था कि जैसे अभी नए टेम्पल्स भी कंस्ट्रक्ट होते हैं बेस्ड ऑन द एशियन कॉन्फ़िगरेशन ऑफ टेम्पल्स यू आर टॉकिंग अबाउट, सो
अभी जो
दे
बन
आर,
रहे हैं, अभी जो बन रहे हैं,
हाँ जी, तो
हाँ,
सर उनको नॉलेज ट्रांसफर कैसे हो रहा है, मतलब दे आर जस्ट रेप्लिकेटिंग द थिंग्स और दे फॉलो द ड्राइंग्स और दे फॉलो द
इस
रिसर्च?
चीज पे एक काम हुई थी, 3 लोग का काम था। एक मतिया सल्विनी है जो आपको जो इटालियन है बट संस्कृतोलॉजिस्ट है, वो ही ट्रांसलेशन बिन ट्रांसलेटिंग है। और एक और प्रोफेसर प्रोफेसर राडा मैडा की स्टूडेंट है, मेघा चांद इंग्लिश, शी इज वर्किंग ऑन अंडरस्टैंडिंग ऑफ द करंट सोमपुरा, उनकी कितना नॉलेज में है अभी भी। सोमपुरा सर अभी भी कंस्ट्रक्शन कर रहे हैं, गुजरात में फेमस टेम्पल बिल्डर्स हैं, उनका कितना आइडियाज है, उनके अपना टेक्स्ट भी है। मेरा काम था कि ज्योमेट्रिकली डिकोड करना, जो यूजिंग ऑल दिस टेक्नोलॉजीज। तो एक टेक्स्ट रहा, एक मेरा ज्योमेट्रिकल दिस थिंग कंपैरिजन के लिए, तीसरा रेसिडुअल नॉलेज कितना है, अभी आया नहीं है इसका पब्लिकेशन। हमने देखा कि अभी जो स्थापति से दे आर रिप्रोड्यूसिंग रादर देन रीइंटरप्रेटिंग इट। ये हमारा अभी तक का मेरा अंडरस्टैंडिंग है। ट्रेडिशनल नॉलेज है उनके पास भी, अभी भी है, बट आज के दिन में द होल सिस्टम इज डिफरेंट। लाइक अभी मटेरियल चेंज हो गया, मटेरियल सेम ही हो सकता है लेकिन क्लैडिंग लेवल पे आ गया है अभी, नॉट द होल कोर से आप शुरू पता, तो क्लैडिंग लेवल, तो उसका आपको डिफरेंट अप्रोचेस बन चुके हैं। तो बड़ी सिस्टम है। वी हैव इवन सीन द वन ऑफ द ट्रेडिशनल आर्किटेक्चर स्कूल, टेंपल आर्किटेक्चर स्कूल इन महाबलीपुरम में जाके देखे थे, हमने देखा कि दे आर रिप्रोड्यूसिंग रादर देन रीइंटरप्रेटिंग। अगर रीइंटरप्रेट करते हो, अगर टेक्स्ट से अगर ट्रांसलेट करते हो एक बिल्डिंग के लेवल पे, तो आप अपना समझ यूज करके कई नए मॉडल्स बना सकते हैं। बट जब ड्राइंग से बिल्डिंग जब रिप्रोड्यूस करते हो, आपको वो आइडिया खत्म हो जाता है। एट द मोस्ट आप सरफेस लेवल पे थोड़े डिफरेंट वेरिएशंस ला सकते हो, बुनियादी लेवल पे, फाउंडेशन लेवल पे आइडिया पे बहुत कम हो सकता है। दैट इज वेयर आवर ट्रेडिशनल नॉलेज सिस्टम हैज बीन डिस्ट्रॉयड बिकॉज ऑफ सो मेनी अदर रीजंस। चाहे 11th सेंचुरी के बाद जितना भी डिसकंटिन्यूटी हुआ, या फिर कॉलोनियल एजुकेशन सिस्टम में जितना हमारा ये नॉलेज बेस्ड सिस्टम से रिप्रोडक्शन, नो आई मीन आप याद करके रिप्रोड्यूस करना, ऐसा था। इंटरप्रिटेशन चल वाला चीज नहीं है। कॉलोनियल सिस्टम ने हमारी पूरी एजुकेशन सिस्टम या जितने भी नॉलेज सिस्टम्स का बहुत बर्बाद किया है। तो आज के दिन जब मैं ये सब चीजें बात करता हूँ तो इट मे साउंड वेरी न्यू, but in reality this is practiced by our ancestors thousands of years back. Look at the level of advancement of it. मुझे to understand this traditional building, मुझे अभी 21st century state of art technology यूज करना है कि 1000 साल बिल्डिंग को एनालाइज करने के लिए। कितनी कॉम्प्लेक्स आइडियाज है जी।
So sir, we have to study a lot because it is there already existing. You are just have to discover that.
यस, एक
Indian
टिप ऑफ द
knowledge.
आइसबर्ग है, बहुत सारा है हमारा अपने इंडियन ट्रेडिशनल नॉलेज सिस्टम्स को समझने के लिए। आई एम श्योर 1000 इस तरह का अप्रोचेस होना चाहिए, देन रीलुक एट इट, रीडिस्कवर आवर ओन नॉलेज व्हिच इज embedded into such a vast heritage that we have. Not just only to idea is to just conserve करने के लिए नहीं, बहुत सारा चीज है अभी भी हमने समझा नहीं इन चीजों के बारे में, मेरा ये मानना है।
That's why, sir, now it should be part of education system.
Thank you.
So once again, sir,
Any other people have anything to ask, please you can ask me. I mean, whatever little that I know I can talk about it. Anybody else? The documentation detailing of study of temple was very intricate and the explanation was very helpful and understanding the same. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Nitesh बोल रहे हैं। कई कभी होता है कि I may try to jump into it because I mean area थोड़ा vast है, तो I try to I mean simplify करने की कोशिश करता हूँ, but शायद होता नहीं क्योंकि सब्जेक्ट थोड़ा कॉम्प्लिकेटेड है, ये भी है जी।
thank you so much, sir, once again. So
thank you
so much, sir, for being part of this FTP, sir. We are honored, sir, to have you here.
Thank you very much, and also apologies for कल का program I had to, it was मेरे हाथ में नहीं था, suddenly it went off. So today I
uncertainties are always there, sir. Thank you so much, Suvan sir.
Thank you.
Namaskar, sir. Namaskar.
Ma'am, our next speaker is here, Dr. Shikha Jain. Shikha ma'am, welcome.
Yeah, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, ma'am. We're happy to
Um,
have you here. This is Professor Manujit Khurana, Chandigarh University.
Thanks. I just saw that Professor Kailasa Rao just finished. So do you think
Yes.
everyone would want a break, 5 or 10 minutes before I start?
No, ma'am.
We
We would
can
like to
start?
hear you.
Okay.
Yes. ma'am.
Okay, fine. Yeah,
Let me give you an introduction, ma'am.
sure.
Dr. Shikha Jain has led more than 50 conservation and museum planning projects across India and received HUDCO awards for 2 projects, which are also documented as best practice projects by the Ministry of Urban Developments. She has authored and edited books on Havelis, a living tradition of Rajasthan, The Princely Terrain Amber, Jaipur and Shekhawati 2004, Stone Crafts of Rajasthan. I'm sure you've written more books, ma'am, which we haven't known of. We are greatly honored to have you here at Chandigarh University, University Institute of Architecture, and the FDP collaborated with us by Council and Training Research Center, Bhopal. And we welcome you for your talk.
Thank you. Thanks to the Chandigarh University for inviting me today. I have a slight cold, as you may be able to hear from my voice, so I may get into coughing if I talk a lot. In case there is an interruption in the presentation, just excuse me. I may switch off just for 2 minutes.
No problem, ma'am.
So should I start sharing my presentation?
Yes, ma'am, please.
Is the screen visible?
It is.
Okay. So just before I start, I just wanted to, have an idea of the faculty involved in, or maybe I will, because usually I like to have an interactive session. So maybe I'm going to show my presentation in 3 phases, and every part of the third each of the 3 sections would have a question. So then that's the time I would like the faculty to respond rather than doing it at the end, if that's fine. So what I have done is, my presentation is structured, as I told you, in 3 phases. And I'm trying to cover the theme provided to me on education, research, and outreach. The first 2 sections, I'm going to explain what kind of indigenous knowledge systems, like what kind of research is required, and by showing you examples of some research that have been done by us and how it can be applied. So the first section is on the architectural design and conservation, the kind of research required for indigenous knowledge systems. And the second section would be more on planning, whether it's, rural or urban planning of what knowledge systems we have and we are losing, or we don't have that knowledge, how to document it and how to, apply it. So that's what I want the audience to, respond on, that how we can apply this knowledge in education and research. In the sections 1 and 2 that I present. And lastly, I will talk about how we can go for outreach and dissemination, of these. So I'll start with, one of the initial research projects that we had undertaken on the stone crafts mapping in Rajasthan. It's stone crafts is an indigenous knowledge system across India, but currently it exists in very few places, so it's largely Rajasthan or Odisha and Tamil Nadu, where we can, and bit of Karnataka, where we can still find stone crafts, but otherwise it's a knowledge that we are losing day by day, because the craftspeople who exist today are very less. And this was a system, I mean, we were following since ages, but post British intervention, we went into a different mode and we stopped using or engaging the craftspeople in architectural design. And that's when this knowledge sort of got a break. So it's just, I mean, the Rajasthan government felt that they have enough stone crafts and they are losing this knowledge, and they, commissioned this research project, the Center for Development of Stones, in association with the Indian Institute of Crafts and Design. And my organization, Drona, took 4 years to do this research project, which was finally published, as in 3 volumes: the Stone Crafts Guide of Rajasthan, a manual that talks, that records each element, architectural element, how it's made, and a resource directory which lists all the craftspeople that are still available that, contemporary architects can actually use. So this is sort of the structure of the guide and the manual that you can see here. We went into, there were, several quarries. I'm going to actually switch off my So as part of the project, when we interviewed quarriers, processors and suppliers, as well as craftspeople, architect and conservationist. So there were about 150 craftspeople that we could interview. And we actually mapped these clusters across entire Rajasthan. So there were in total 9 clusters that were mapped. And, the types of stones varies. And the craftspeople have their expertise in different kinds of stones. So all this data was documented and recorded. You can see out here the process that was recorded and the products. So clearly this craftsmanship is something, very unique to India and Rajasthan that needs to be propagated more. But if we currently look at our, the architectural education, most of the time the students are not informed about the details or the process that is involved in this. For this project, we had about 5 groups where we involved architectural students and interns who went to the field and interviewed these craftspeople. And we really, our thing was, how can we learn about stone crafts and knowledge systems? So one is understanding details from the historic architecture in stone, and second is learning from the master craftsperson. So from the archival resources, we could actually understand that the stone used in historic architecture, is even mentioned in our traditional texts. They have, the bonding that is done with different kinds of stone. They name the male, female, and neutral stone specified in traditional texts. And of course, examples of stone use is there in historic architecture since ages, right from the rock art to the temples. You just heard Professor Kailasa Rao about this, and later on in forts and even houses. And this is very well recorded in the traditional texts, including, paintings like you see here from the Babarnama, where he's supervising construction of garden, or the construction of Agra Fort in Akbarnama. You find its use in British period buildings, post-independence India also, in temples like the Lakshmi Narayan Mandir that continue to use stone architecture. One of the best examples is this Vipassana Pagoda, which is supposed to be one of the biggest pillarless stone dome constructed in Mumbai. The builders in stone or the craftspeople and patrons, I mean, these are very important. Who are the stone craftspersons today? The temple builder, sculptor, stone carver, inlayer, stone mason, stone polisher, quarry workers. So you see the Sutradhar, Stapati, it could be the Sompuras community, which are residing in Gujarat currently, but they are the ones making temples today, even today, largely in northern and western India. And then you have the Stapatis community that is working in southern India, in the Tamil Nadu area and Karnataka. You have the sculptor or shilpkar. So these are, specialized expertise. Most shilpkar specialize in the making of idol of a particular deity, deriving designs from years of training and intuition. They often select the stone for the idols at the quarry. They calculate the proportions required for the deity and undertake its carving and finishing. The stone carver, Silawat or Santaraj. I'm not going to read this because it's aggravating my throat, but I'm going to stop for two seconds so that you can read what is said about the stone carver. The inlayer or Jadati doing the inlay work. And even the basic stone mason or mistri. This knowledge is getting lost today. We don't even know how to make the stone walls. The helpers like polishers or quarry worker. This was the manual that was used, and you can see what was covered in the manual. So starting from structural elements to finishes, each and every detail was documented. After interviewing the craftspeople, architectural interns, students were engaged in interviewing. There was training given to each group on how to interview, how to record, how to make videos. And finally, all this data was translated into the manual. So if for structural elements like, the arch, what are the various kinds of arches? The cut stone, bracketed, cobbled, true arch, or even the types according to form. Pointed, semicircular, segmental, trefoil, or cusped. How are they assembled? So the detail that how the one stone fits into the other, you can see this dove and tail, coming to join two stones. And the various kinds of carving. I mean, both traditionally what it's used or even currently, like you have this, Aluko-born building in Gurgaon, but yet because Bikanerwala, the cultural identity is linked with stone carving. So just the door is carved in stone here. Similarly, beams, how many kinds of beams are there? The monolithic, assembled, square or rectangular, plain or carved. What are the fixing techniques for these beams? Brackets, which is one of the most diverse, in terms of design and variation. We find it in various historic structures. So it could be single, double, triple, quadruple, and the corner ones, you can see how it expands, the octagonal one. So it was really understanding how the stone fits into each other because there is no mortar used. And the jointing is just, one thing fitting into another like dove and tail. You can see out here how this stone bracket, which is the corner one, which on 5 sides, it's made using 3 pieces. So you can see one here, another one, and the third one. And this was created as a model by late Mr. Nimish Patel, who was also advising us on this documentation. So various types according to construction, you can see the variation in brackets. It could be single or just several layers, extensively carved. The fixing details. So you can see how much the bracket is going inside, if it's supporting a chhajja, or how much it goes inside if it's supporting a complete balcony. The usual rule is that it's, the plain bracket should go as much in as the carved one you see outside, as a principle of cantilever. So these are some variations. So again, from the traditional carving to the current ones, what kind of designs are available in brackets? Similarly, columns, monolithic, assembled, hand carved, machine carved, and how this fits in, the basic, the base, the capital, the jointing, the carving details, and how these are used in various ways. The roof form, which is very complex because you have the flat and the domed one both. Domic flat ones are simple because you just have the tukri roofing, where stone pieces are just linked with each other, laid straight. But the domical roofs are in various forms. You could have cobbled ones, or the ribbed ones, or the segmented one, as you see in these drawings. And it's interesting to see old buildings because you can actually get to see, some buildings which are in ruins where you get to see construction details. So on the left side top, you can see the cobble dome, how the construction is done. Below, you can see the craftsperson who's making the rib dome. So there are several ribs that come together. And the segmented one where it's in 2 pieces. So basically, these 2 pieces join. This is another chhatri, like the square chhatri or dome. So you can see how it is made in various pieces. This is also, in layers, you can see sort of cobbling in this dome. The steps, various kinds of steps you see out here. The bavlis, of course, are there, but even in current, construction, there is a lot of use of stone steps in various forms, and you can see the variety of designs available here. This, of course, is the traditional bavli. So the walls, of course, again, the rubble masonry course, there are various forms, how they do infill, and how this kind of construction continues to happen even today, especially in places like Jodhpur, Jaipur, in fact, all across Rajasthan, because this is the, the craftsmanship is still available there. The architectural elements, which are the most interesting, including the Jharoka, Jali, Dasa, Vedika, Arnal. So you see the Jharokas, various variations again that is documented, and also the fixing detail on the right side. So you can see how the Jharoka would fit into the base below. You can see the gaps here. And the kind of Jharokas, of course, that are created. The Jalis, which is one of the most beautiful creation in stone. And you can see the variation, the kind of refinedness from the simple one to this central one where you see, circular Jalis. And I will talk more about Jali in detail, showing you one particular Jali on how it evolves, the plinth coping, the railings, and how they fit into each other. So again, we have a craftsperson who's marking it, who's making holes, and how the railing is fitting in the details. So this drawing shows how the stone railing and would fit into the top rails would fit into the pillar. And you can see the beauty of the stone railing. So on the left, of course, you have the traditional ones. On the right side, you see this from the Gandhi Museum, which is in Delhi. You can see the innovation in stone railing below, which is very contemporary, but still interesting use of stone craftsmanship. And of course, we have architects like Raj Reval. On the left, you can see one of his building example who continues to use stone inspired from, some of the past constructions in Rajasthan. And you can see water spouts, details like this, and of course, today finishes is something that stone is used extensively in. But of course, the traditional finishes, you just have different kinds of hand finishes, which have been recorded and documented as part of the indigenous knowledge. And the current finishes, of course, the kind of finishes that you get through the processors and suppliers today. But the whole idea of this was to promote the craftsmanship and to link this knowledge, with the contemporary practice. And I'm just going to show you one example that even one element to what detail, one needs to get to understand. So if we just look at jali itself, its origin was from the Sanskrit word jal, which means just, a jal would just be a cross one. And you can see in this old temple of Chittor that there is a cross basis. The inner elements have been added later, but our basic origin of jali in the temples was just this crossed grid. And then, we have the 9x9 grid, which further elaborated. There was historical developments with 16th century Mughal influence. More complex jalis, hexagonal and octagonal, came into picture. And just on jalis, you can see the kind of texts that are available, the Rajvallabh, Jal Kumudi, and others by Jal Vigyan by a Mistri. So these are the kind of, texts one needs to interpret to even understand what these, how these are made. So this is, I'm just giving you an example that we recorded in the City Palace, Udaipur. And there is this chhatri on top which is called Mukut Mandir. You can see it has some jali work. And we had to, if you see the paintings, the one that says 1700, if you can see my arrow in the center, it shows the structure has no jali. Whereas in 1765, you can see there is, jali work added. And later on, there is also in this picture, you can see, and then later on, there is also the glass work added. So it sort of records how in each phase, the jali got more evolved. And this is a more detail of this. So you can see the square grid jali, which was the basic jali, which is what I said, was the origin. You can see how this square grid was filled with later infill. So here you find more complex structures. And on the right side, on the railing, you see, the octagonal kind of jali grid, which was an influence of the Mughals. And below, you can see the British period changes. So you can see the jali has evolved into something more floral and has got stained glass. So this just shows, how before 15th century, then 16th to 18th century, and then, 19th, 20th, how the jali evolved. And it can be, so jali, if we are looking at creating a jali, it can be made, by establishing a grid, which is square, rectangular, pentagonal, hexagonal, or octagonal, or just a basic module. And the most common and versatile is the hexagonal, which is called chemas. And what you do is mark the center, divide both sides, and mark the grid, and then draw arc using the grid, as you can see in the figure, and then follow this pattern. So this was actually after a video recording of a craftsperson, master craftsperson in Makarana, that we could actually understand how the jali is created. Today, even the craftspeople who are working on it, you just use like a stencil. So they would just, they don't have the knowledge of a master craftsperson. They would take a pattern, just, use a stencil and get the jali. And the same thing is happening even with CNC or getting the pattern printed or used. This is what the craftsperson showed us. You can see him marking with a green leaf and then creating the entire jali in the various steps that I just showed you, using a divider and then creating the pattern and cutting out these pieces. The difference between this master craftsperson and using a stencil is that using the same grid, the master craftsperson can design various jali forms. So he can generate hundreds of jali forms. But if we are using the stencil, we can just create what is there. It's a very frozen and fixed kind of design. And you can see the variations that are possible in a rectangular, in a hexagonal, or the Chemas grid, the 30-60 Elycha that they call. And this, of course, is a complex one, and then the square grid. So in the hexagonal grid, you can see this allows the maximum number of modules. You can see the various modules that can be picked and the kind of jali that can be created. So you can see these various forms which have been translated into AutoCAD by, the students who were working on it. And one of the things that we found, when we were interviewing the craftspeople, especially for the jali, there was one master craftsperson in Jaisalmer who told us, that today he gets architects who just come with an AutoCAD drawing, which is offset on a computer, and they've created a jali, and they ask him to make that jali. And he said it's just they don't understand how stone is carved, and they don't have the understanding of how the jali is created. It's just some form in 2-dimension on AutoCAD. So I think that is, to avoid that kind of thing, we really need to understand how the creativity in jali can be retained, rather than just fixed forms. And these are some beautiful examples of the, stone carving used even till today. You can see this gateway with jali in a house in Jodhpur. And this combination is of square and octagonal, which actually gives you beautiful jalis. You can see the right below, marble jali, very intricate. And this is one of the most complex stone jali that has ever been created, I think. And you can see it's a square and octagonal module, but the kind of refineness, you cannot even make out, what grid is used here. And you can imagine the craftsmanship intricacy in actually carving this. Sometimes it takes them 3 to 4 months to carve a single jali like this. We also recorded, the tools and methodologies for carving these jalis. Now I will just tell you how the application of this is visible. So in case of City Palace Udaipur, we found that there were broken jalis that you see out here. So in some cases, we could actually find the patterns very clearly, and we could get the jali recreated because the pattern was visible. But in this case, when you see left side on top, the pattern is hardly visible. And when we asked someone to make this jali, the person who created it is what is below marked as cross. So basically, he generated from this, but he could not get the actual design. And then we tried, with one of our trainees to create the jali on AutoCAD using the methodology that the craftsperson had told us, marking the center, the division, and trying. And that's what you see on the right side top. And we could actually come up with the right design that you see on the right bottom. And this is what was finally created on site. So it's just to explain that what we need to understand is the whole process, and that requires a lot of research, even oral histories and interviews before establishing what is the correct way of doing it. Moving on from the stone crafts, I'm talking about the traditional texts that have to be interpreted, like the Vastu texts. And I'm sure in the earlier presentations, you would have heard enough about Vastu, but there are numerous texts talking about Vastu or the new construction. There are very few who talk about the Jeernodhar, and that is actually in the Agama texts that we have. So when we are doing conservation of temples, then it's not really Vastu text that we refer to, but the Agama text. And you can see the list of these texts that we were referring to while doing a research on the temple architecture. And specifically in Tamil Nadu, because there was a concern of conservation works, the way they were being carried out. We had this UNESCO mission to look at the Tamil Nadu temples and their conservation process. And we found that there were huge issues in the way the conservation was being done, like in this Madurai Amman temple, the lotus pond, you can see one complete corridor has been demolished. And they were using this stone. This stone is from Karnataka. It does not match the historic stone. And they were doing, this is the old stone which could easily have been retained. But for some reason, they removed this entire corridor. And you can see the old column on the left side, the kind of carving it has, the figural carving, which is impossible to produce now. Vis-a-vis on the right side, you see the new column, which is, the carving is not of very good quality and it is a machine carved element. So it's really sad that they were replacing these original historic elements with these new ones without understanding, what knowledge has gone into creating these. And also the fact that the old ones can be conserved. And if the new ones have to be created, they need to use the process and methodology that exists in the old ones. And to look at this issue of conservation, we had, the knowledge people in Tamil Nadu area are the Agama experts and the Sthapatis. We had a joint workshop with the Sthapatis, Agama experts and ASI officials, as well as experts, temple experts, and really looked at what is going wrong, where we have lost this entire knowledge and why can't we do conservation of our temples using the old knowledge systems. And we understood that today the temples are living temples. Agamas are actually the texts that guide the rituals in each of the temples, but they also have the chapter on Jeernodhar, whereas Vastu is the text which is used largely for construction of new temples. So there is a dialogue that is required. Vastu is used by Sthapati and Agama is used by the Agama Acharyas. And with time now, there is a big gap and there is no dialogue between Acharyas and Sthapatis. So in the conservation of temples, they are just using Sthapatis to create new structures, while the knowledge of conserving the old is not being continued. And also the fact that these temples are very significant, iconic, national World Heritage value. So why you need ASI as well as, the traditional Acharya and Sthapati to create a conservation manual that can be followed by the architects or conservation architects today. And that derives, that has the basis in our traditional texts and the indigenous knowledge systems. Another example, in the house form, we find, we used to have the courtyard houses. We all know that. It started from the center, whether it's a rural form, Bada, or, how it concretized. You have the center that actually determines how the house form from the Bada. You have spaces like in Havelis, it's called the Tibada and the Chaubada, which is, the outer spaces that get created. So you can see the evolution of form that is recorded here from a rural house to a double court, single court and double court Haveli and a multi-court house. And this kind of centric evolution of inner spaces is there in most of our house forms, whether it's the Haveli in case of Rajasthan or northern India, or it is the Rajwada, or it is the Vadas in the Maharashtra, or the Rajwada in West Bengal, or the Chettinad houses in Tamil Nadu. But we have to understand that as per the indigenous perspective, we design from the center outwards and not the other way around. You can see it even in the ground plan, the rituals that were followed, the Vedi that is there in traditional texts, or even while recording these historic forms. Like this is a plan of a Haveli. So you can see the court center, how it determined the elevations of the inner court, which were always more elaborate than the outer facade. And on interviewing these people on how this Haveli was constructed or the house form, we found that, everything was marked from the center outward first. So again, I mean, whether it is plot of the Haveli that you see, so boundary of a plot, the first thing is mark the center and then evolve your design. Same is there for the proportions of an arch or even for the jali. I just showed you marking the center and the border when I was explaining. Or why we used odd numbers in steps or even in the stone putties of a roof is because of the centric numbering that we had. And using this, actually, we could, what I found was you can actually read, just stand in front of a Haveli or a traditional house form, and you can determine whether it is a single courtyard or a double courtyard or more without going inside that Haveli because of the way it is created. So like this corner house form, you can see how the center of the court is also visible on the side facade as well as the center facade. And it's easy for a person going around this road to say that this, looking at the elevation, to say that this is a double courtyard Haveli. So this centric evolution, I'm just showing how it went into double to triple to multi-courtyard Haveli, whether it was a single family cluster or fraternal clusters where you had Marwari families with various brothers doing business together and living in the same area. But you can see, like, from one center, how the entire form evolves. And this center sort of gets reflected even in our ritualistic center, whether it's a temple or a well, the political center, whether it would be noble's house or Haveli, or in the urban planning form, it would be the ruler's abode, and of course the number of dwelling units around. So this is, the first section that I wanted to show you, where I'm just going to say that, we are using a Western approach currently followed in all architecture colleges, where we say this is the Western approach, that courtyard space is carved out in the built area. But if we really look and use the Indian knowledge systems approach, it's actually the courtyard that is the primary space, and the other, the design evolves around it. So my question for the audience is, how can you incorporate this IKS of designing in current architectural education? I don't know how. Do I just have another 10 minutes to finish the lecture, or should we break and take questions now?
We do have time, ma'am.
Ma'am, we have time. We can take the questions now.
Okay. So would anybody like to respond on this? Because my concern, I mean, after, this indigenous knowledge system, realizing that how Indian perspective is, whether it's the craftsperson or even our house form, or even if in today's practice, we see that the way we think we have a lot of centers and multi-centers in our cities. But when we are designing in architecture colleges, the students are never taught this methodology. So that's my, question for the faculty involved in design in architectural colleges. That, do you feel that there are ways one can incorporate this?
Hi, ma'am.
Yeah.
This is Karan Sharma. I'm an assistant professor in Himachal.
Mhm.
Ma'am, I think, after seeing your presentation, I think the major problem that occurs in architectural education is the lack of hands-on experience. So once we start involving kids more on site, for example,
Yeah.
you showed the wonderful example of, how Jali is carved on site versus how a student comes up with the AutoCAD design and then they say, make this. So once they work with materials, then they will know the possibilities and the limitations of the material. So I think that is something which we can incorporate. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's what I think, because our traditional system was really all hands-on. And now we've got totally into a different mode. And in fact, this is something more we are facing post-COVID, because one has really just gone online, including such lectures. But yeah, the field exposure for students is something that is very important for, involving for them to understand the design process. Anyone else who would like to respond?
I would request other participants to also come forward and be active in this question and answer session, please.
Hi, good afternoon, ma'am.
Yeah, good afternoon.
Ma'am, thank you for the wonderful presentation. So, ma'am, I just want to ask one question that, you talked about that, hands-on practices should be incorporated in a bigger and wider way. So, ma'am, on what levels do you think it would be better if we introduce those systems? Because we have like a 5 year course, and people in the first year who are coming, they are changing their language to drawings and designs and everything. So ma'am, at what level should it's convenient or it is advisable to start these hands-on practices so that their relative understanding is better?
I mean, personally, I feel that, in the design studio itself, so whether it is maybe not first year, but then definitely second year onwards, because it's what we have done is post-British, because we are totally, all of us, including myself, we are trained in the British form of education system. So when we are taught design, in a method that they have been designing, and that's how we design. We say site area, then this is the boundary, and this, then we get into some context and start designing. But nobody has ever, told us that, this is the Indian way of designing from center outwards. Try that. So I think that is something, I mean, students can try and see, whether it functions using a center and then marking outwards. Because, or even if they don't want to, it's not, one is not forcing them. But as the process of designing, we should actually introduce the students to both kinds, saying, these are the two processes used, so that they can select on how they would want. Hello?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. I don't know,
Thank you, ma'am.
my screen stopped showing the thing, so I thought I'm disconnected.
No,
No,
So
ma'am,
yeah,
you're
so
visible.
okay, that's fine. So I think that's what is important, that they get introduced to the process itself in the beginning, because right now we are only teaching them one kind, and then later when they get into somebody's interested in history and all, then we start they, or on their own, they start looking at the traditional thing, or we as conservation practitioners, we get into the mode. But we don't introduce them to the process of designing as it was in India, or as it is being used by craftspeople or sthapatis or sompuras. So I would say, I mean, even if it is history of architecture,
yes, ma'am.
Excuse me, ma'am. Dr. Shikha, ma'am.
Oh, sorry, I was speaking while I was on mute. Till what point have you, did you lose me?
From the beginning, ma'am.
Ma'am, ma'am, after the question answer, you had to start again, ma'am.
Okay. So I think
110
there was a,
slide. 110 slide, ma'am.
this is the one, right?
Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. So no, I was just responding to the question. You understood that, right?
Yes,
Yes,
ma'am.
ma'am.
Yes, ma'am. I did.
Okay.
Thank you,
So
ma'am.
then I will go on to the next one, which is about planning. And here I'm just going to be, I'll try to be faster, which is, if we look at our planning, we had this nature culture interpretation, how to understand nature. And that is what reflects in our culture and cultural, treaties that we have. Like you have, the Tamil Sangam and Vedas, which actually look at adaptation of the natural form and some basic, like even the Vastu text that comes, it's basic understanding of nature, from the Indian context, if we say. Like if I'm a person standing, where the sun rises east is where I would begin. I mean, that is our concept, not only in India, but across Asia, I would say. And so we have associations of, daytime brightness, beginning, and the so associated element is fire here. And that's how it started evolving. And this was the entry point to be left open. So you would find, the Suraj pole or the historic built form related to that. And similarly, on the right side, you would have south or the Dakshin or the mountains. On the left side, you would have north or the water bodies. And below is the west, which is, the night and darkness. So this is the way, it was understood. And if you look at all our historical maps, you would find east on the top. So this is again something, if you look at, cosmography, the Jain ones or the Buddhist ones, or any of the East Asian mapping historically, they all show east on the top. We started using north on the top as a colonial, process. And this is, the landscape that we understood. You will find it in various cosmological maps. And it gives you an understanding of how nature was understood and interpreted. And there were basic, changes through centuries. So you had the fear of nature. First, you had the hunter-gatherer or the rock cut caves. You had, nature as guardian deity. So where you started revering nature as God. And then, of course, all our festivals and all, as you know, are associated with the agrarian society. Like you have Baisakhi, with linked to the natural, to the whatever crop is growing and the time period of that. So it's all, nature as guardian deity is linked with our agrarian lifestyle. And we continue to follow it, the lunar calendar that we traditionally followed. We follow it still in all our festivals. At the same time, we've also adopted the Western system. So, I mean, for us, it's very tough because we are using both the systems together. And of course, later on, it was military landscape, and of course, the manifestation in city plans. So starting from the rock caves, where you can see how human being was trying to understand through these rock art, what was he recording here, just how he hunts. Was it to teach his children on how they can do hunting, or was it just a record for them to show what they have been doing? So there have been several, interpretations of these, and it's very interesting. It's still ongoing. And we have a very rich, heritage of rock arts across India. Then Mount Kailash or other associated, Buddhist, Hindu. So this is where nature is revered as God. And Kanchenjunga is one example where we had studied it in detail. So you can see the Buddhist cultural landscape where, the Mount Zonga is actually the deity or the god, mountain god. And this is celebrated in their festivals, Panglapsol, since centuries till now. And to the extent that even the Westerners respected it so much that Mount Zonga is one of the third highest peak, but it is one peak where the mountaineers have not reached, because after reaching there they just stop below the peak because it is revered as a god. So they respect the local communities association. And you can see this kind of nature culture interpretation of the mountain as god, and then the rivers and water bodies also as sacred, all reflected on the left side if you see in the natural landscape. And then you see the monastery's top, which actually reflects the Mount Zonga in a miniature form. So whatever, I mean, even our temple forms for that matter, when I was saying Mount Kailash, the main shrine or the Shikhara is actually a representation of the mountain. And that's why it takes that form. So the sacred peaks, how they are also reflected in the rituals. You have the main peak and then the smaller peak inside the monastery. Or even in the tribals, how these are rituals of the tribals. So they're just using some green leaves. The central one is the highest, showing Mount Zonga, and the smaller peaks on the sides. And this is using stones. Another person from the Lepcha community in Sikkim is just using stones for a similar manifestation of nature and praying to nature. And this was actually recorded by us, and this is what with the Sikkim Forest Department, and it actually led to the inscription of Kanchenjunga as an associative cultural landscape, respecting the indigenous knowledge, and how they safeguard the environment with this association. And a similar process, I mean, in Meghalaya, you see the living root bridges of Meghalaya. Now that is it's the Khasi community. It's one of the most unique, formations. This kind of knowledge system doesn't exist anywhere in the world. They use this ficus. You can see this bridge that they've created using ficus, which the community builds. And it's lasted, all these bridges, they have more than 200 in Meghalaya, and they've lasted more than 100 to 200 years. And when they have the knowledge of recreating them again, many people can walk across. Of course, now some of them are being used for tourism, but this is the knowledge, and they make these ladders. So you can see this ladder on which they are climbing down. So the ficus can be used to creating bridges, can be used to creating these ladders. And this is what allows them to do farming in the valley below. So they climb down the ladders across the bridges. And it's a very unique system. And then they are using, everything traditional, the bamboo, how it's used, even the springs, natural springs on the right that you see, which they use to drink water. And this is one of the photographs of the community, where the old person is telling them on how to how you should preserve the ficus and retain these bridges. And on the right you see a bee, the bee honey that is saved and stored in this bark. They actually pray to the honeybee, and they tell that we are taking bee honey only for our use, and we would not take more than what is required, and we will leave some for you. So these kind of associations, this is a person singing about nature. So this whole song is nature, how you should live sustainably with nature. So these are important indigenous knowledge ways of living that we have currently lost, in the post-industrial situation where we are just misusing natural resources. And this was something visible even in our historic settlements. The centric, way of planning, it's very evident in our Tamil temple towns, or even in, even if the form doesn't look exactly geometrical, you can see in Puri, Orissa, how the the Shankshetra or the area was defined. So the Shankshetra would be the natural resources linked, the water bodies and the hills around it that would be sacred, that would define, the main form of the city with the main center of the temple. And it's very evident in Jaipur city plan, how this, you can see on the left side, how this plan was created using the Shankargarh. The north-south axis has the Ganeshgarh on the top and the Shankargarh below. And then you have the Surya temple on top of the right hill. And that's how the north-south axis is created. You get the main central zone, and then you offset it into the 9-grid square. So of course, everybody says 9-grid square is Prastara and Vastu, but the essence of Vastu, as well as you can see its actual application on ground, is linked to understanding these natural forms. So you can see the surrounding hills and how the Jaipur planning was modified. It's not just creating the 9-grid and pasting it below, but it's understanding the natural forms and responding to it, and then applying it on ground. So the second question, of course, was how can we incorporate this IKS of planning in current architectural education? But maybe I'll just continue and stop at the third point and we have the discussion. What do you suggest?
No, ma'am, you can ask questions.
If anybody wants to suggest anything on this, on the planning, please, if we can stop now, otherwise I'll continue and we can take both the planning and the outreach question at the end.
Ma'am, a very good source of inspiration of, I don't know, I may be wrong, the Jaipur city plan was adopted in Johar Kala Kendra.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know, I mean, how successful or what was exactly the master architect's source of inspiration or plan was, but what I have read was it was taken from Jaipur city plan.
Right, yeah. I think that's the good thing. Jaipur city plan has inspired a lot historically,
Yes,
also
yes,
other cities.
yes.
And of course, for a contemporary architect like Charles Correa, it was really a symbolic building.
Yes,
was
even
made.
the entrance was off-centered because of it was taken because the mountain was on the side, and the certain part of the city was off this thing, the grid, like you were saying, the planning. So even the entrance was taken, one grid was off located because it was inspired from that plan,
Right.
So I mean, he was incorporating the Indian knowledge system in his knowledge system. So I'm sure we can learn something from this, from our Indian knowledge system.
Yeah, that's a good point, because I mean, it shows how it can inspire contemporary architects and be used in current designing. Yeah.
Yes.
Shall I carry on then?
Yes, ma'am, please do.
Okay. So the last section is on outreach and dissemination modes, and I'm just going to talk about how which I've already said, like, as you know, we are an NGO and we try to incorporate interns. So we have, I mean, the foundation that we have, we do educational grants, internships, research projects with other architecture colleges. So currently, I mean, with SPA Bhopal, SPA Vijayawada, Manipal University, Jaipur, Ayojan are some of the colleges that we have worked with. And training programs and workshops, exhibitions and competitions and heritage walks or apps. I mean, this is what, we try to use to disseminate. And our own whole intention is, how do we involve interns, institutions, craftspeople, local residents, and others with heritage? How do we sustain the cultural identity of built form space, people, city, environmental balance of the city as a cultural landscape? And how can we use today, digital technology is important, but how can we use it in heritage conservation to connect with the community? So I'm just giving you an example of the Golden Temple work that we did in Amritsar. We were assigned the work of doing a detailed project report on the main shrine. It was really a blessing to get this work. And we did a complete documentation of the entire main shrine. We had to do the conservation of the gold work inside as well as the paintings. But one of the most challenging was, the Darshni Diori. You can see that's the entrance to the main shrine, and the Darshni Diori, you can see this historic picture shows the paintings on the main Darshni Diori. But during 1984, this was completely damaged in the blast. And then after that, in 2014, this is the image. So they had replastered it with cement, and then there were no paintings, it was completely lost. So we were asked to do, to take up the painting work on this, because they wanted to revive the old structure. But I mean, if you see in this old picture, there is no color or nothing. And so what we did was we researched a lot, and we found that there is this old picture, and it's actually, we found it in a small museum, Albert Kahn Museum in Paris. So you can imagine the kind of resources from India that are just spread across the world. And we had to, I asked one of our international interns, Luke Bruno. He was actually coming from Paris to work in Jaipur, and I told him that just before he started to Delhi, he took his flight to Delhi, if he could go to this museum and get the high resolution image. And we requested the museum to give us the high resolution image for taking up conservation work. So we could get a very high resolution image of this, which we printed to a high level, so that we could know the actual patterns, the historic patterns and paintings that are available. So we got the evidence, and using that, we engaged the local, the Rajasthani craftspeople, because they are the ones, even during Maharaja Ranjit Singh's time, they are the ones who were engaged to do all the painting work in Amritsar as well as Golden Temple. So you can see, how the cement brackets were broken. They are replaced by lime brackets below. And you can see the painting work, which is using the traditional material as well as traditional craftspeople. They call it the Alagila work, and using the patterns that we could actually get. They made this khaka. You can see how they made the khaka after using the high resolution images. And finally, we could, restore the exterior and complete it. And currently, we are working on the interiors also, as paintings were found on the interiors of Darshni Diori, which were whitewashed later. But it's just to give you an example of how we engage always architectural colleges and students in our work. The Gandhi Bhavan in Chandigarh is another example, though it's a modern heritage building. But of course, Pierre Jeanneret was inspired by Gandhi's philosophy here. And here we could use like point cloud, digital, as well as infrared to analyze all materials inside the building. And we had, during preparing the conservation management plan, which was funded by the Getty Foundation, we had 4 workshops where we engaged architectural students from CCA and other colleges in Chandigarh to, for the exhibitions and workshops in documentation, condition assessment. We also had a visually impaired intern with us who devised the universal access route and we could put braille signages on the building. I won't get into this. I mean, this is just showing in the museum projects how we are using digital and for communication and for outreach. This is the Bhagat Singh Museum in Khatkar Kalan, again, close to Chandigarh, about 2.5 hours. Or, I mean, this is another museum in Chittorgarh where we see, there was a court space where we could actually create hyperreal mannequins to recreate the entire space as a living experience. And we had a student intern here, an 11th standard student who was studying Meera, fascinated by Meera. And I engaged her in the office for 3 months to just be the curator for the Meera gallery. So she's the one who researched she finally wrote a book also as an 11th, 12th student, school student. And her book is published by Intact, her book on Meera. But it's just, if the students today have a lot of potential, and one should really give them the space to develop and to learn more about these aspects. This is part of our research grant, which we did with Singhad University and School of Planning and Architecture, Bhopal, in documenting Ajmer. And again, we use LIDAR scanning. Dr. Vishakha is there with Oriel Prizeman from Cardiff University, who were our partners. You can see documenting Havelis and other historic structures using LIDAR, and then creating a website from the research work where all the research activities of the students are placed. So, everything what the students worked on is available, and it is available for all to use. So we got calls from other architecture colleges that they need this information. So the link is already there and they can actually download and use it. Similarly, in Jaipur, which is a historic city, we've been working since 2006 to 18 to 22 now. And we've got several World Heritage projects there. With sites inscribed, including Jantar Mantar, the Jaipur City, and Amer Fort. But we started with this project on Ghat Ki Guni. This is, was my bachelor's thesis project, and it became a live project. You can see the use of traditional materials in conserving historic gardens. And then after conservation, and finally the heritage walk that was launched. So this is the outreach and dissemination I'm talking about, that the work doesn't end by finishing certain things or just studying and research, because it needs to be continued. That's why it needs to be passed on to the younger generation in the community. This is an example of a participatory walk design, where again we engaged colleges. So this is Oxford Brookes study program, urban planning students who designed and created these spaces, and they worked with our team. And then we had these proposals discussed with the community in a community park. We displayed what is being proposed so that they could participate in it. In the urban conservation projects in Jaipur, you can see the conservation work, the Jantar Mantar, and the outreach projects like Astro Rangoli in Jantar Mantar, to make colleges of architecture students understand how the instrument works, the astronomical instruments. And the Creative City, which looks at the crafts again in Jaipur. So it was a UNESCO tag where we again documented all the crafts in Jaipur, including, how the process they are, and also recording, the process, the product, as well as the craftspeople. And finally, you also have a museum of crafts. A building was reused as part of the smart city to create this museum. But in the heritage walk now, it's not just about the buildings, but it's also about the craftsperson. This lag bangle maker actually is making words, alphabets of the first word of each person's name in the walk, which can be bought by them. And again, the universal access tour, which was part of the Jantar Mantar thing, but creating these outreach activities. This is with Ayojan College of Architecture, 1-week program in a public space, learning from the craftsmen. You can see the students learning how to make, lac products, and then also painting. This is a public space in Jaipur that they, use crafts to improve the situation. And there were several activities organized as part of this crafts. And also looking at, these crafts finally being inscribed on World Heritage, we've created this website. Even the website logo was through a competition that was won by a student from Mumbai, which looks at the grid, the outstanding value of Jaipur, the plan form, the architectural form, and you can see the jali detail, the crafts coming through. So it communicates all the components from planning to the detail. And that's how, this logo was selected for the website. And it's in association with, there are two institutions, Manipal University and Ayojan, who are knowledge partners besides Intac and others. So this is Jaipur World Heritage.com. And also the sound that you hear is actually the morcha that you see this guy below, who's creating this from his mouth, and a metal instrument. So I think this is my last slide, and the question saying, how can you aim at more outreach? So we can leave it discussion now.
It's a lot of work, man. That's really a lot of work in your lifetime.
Yeah.
Yes. That's a lot of conservation and work.
Yeah, it's also, I mean, our primary aim is outreach, and it's not, we create like the jaipurworldheritage.com. We are
Yes.
uploading all our reports and all our web, research
Yes.
there, including our knowledge partners who've agreed to share,
Yes.
so that it is available for all architecture colleges and students to use.
Yes. Yes.
So
Yes. Absolutely. I mean, we started with something as Indian knowledge system and FTP audit and trying to understand Indian knowledge system from a very this thing, and what we have now delved into and grasped is it's like a whole universe out there, and a whole different this thing take on it. Is that's what my understanding is of now,
yeah,
And-
we have a lot of work to do. I mean, there's so much
Yes.
in the Indian knowledge
Absolutely.
system.
Yes, absolutely. 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 Absolutely right.
Shikha ma'am, I would like to connect with you, as I see you are connected with so many institutes and kids are working on hands-on. And I will, after the FDP, get connected with you, and I would want my children to have hands-on work done with you. We are in close vicinity in Chandigarh. I remember you doing work when you were doing the Punjab, the Gandhi
Gandhi Bhavan, yeah.
Bhavan in Punjab University, because one of my students was associated with you at that point of time. So yeah, so I think I will
Sure,
get back. I
anytime.
will get connected
Sure,
with
we
you.
are always open to collaboration with institutions.
Fatima, we can also share that we have Center of Excellence Indian Knowledge Systems ma'am here in Chandigarh
Right.
University. So we would like to do some projects. We would identify a few of the heritage sites in our region, and then it will be identified, and we'll be documenting it, and then we'll get back to you, ma'am. So any help would be requiring from you later.
Sure,
And
most
And we
welcome.
look forward that we'll do some work together under this Center of Excellence.
Yeah, definitely. I look forward to.
Thank you, ma'am.
I would request the
Manjeet ma'am,
audience.
there are questions in the chat. In the chat box, there are questions. Can I see if you have already answered or you need to?
Ma'am, these are previous this thing. I would request the audience, if they have any questions, please come forward, unmute yourself and ask the questions, or you can post it in the chat box. Anybody? Please come forward. It was a very interesting session. I'm sure you have some queries or something to ask or share your opinion on something.
Maybe it's past lunchtime now.
Yeah. Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely.
So I think we were supposed to close by 2:25, right? We just
Yes,
have
ma'am.
5 minutes. But I don't see any questions. So.
I don't know. So, ma'am, you worked from Rajasthan to Chandigarh to the south. You're associated with every architectural fraternity or style of architecture and understood that. So when you go into a different region, so I mean the history and the trend and the style, you would have to study that before.
Right. Yeah, that is something I really enjoy doing. I just enjoy cultures and the diversity, and India
Yeah.
is the best place to learn that, with
Yeah.
the diverse culture. So like I said, there is a basic principle that is followed everywhere, this center thing, or,
Yeah.
certain philosophy, but then the diversity is so much. So whenever I'm going into an area, my first, approach is to get someone local to tell me.
Yeah.
because they have the knowledge,
Yes.
which, and of course, I look at the local texts, which is sometimes it's challenging because the best local texts are actually in the local language.
Local language.
So that is why it's good to have a local person who can also look at that,
Yeah.
and because you don't know every language. Hindi is
Yes.
something I can still read, but there are other languages.
Yeah.
So it's always a challenge, but that's what one is. I always have a local team. When I was working in Andhra, I had this bright urban planning, she was a gold medalist from SPA Vijayawada who worked with me for 2 years, and she knew Kannada, Malayali, Telugu, and Tamil. So, for 2 years, she was with me stationed there, and she could really correspond, do everything, and also get into the actual system because I just tell her what methodology approach. So they also learn the process. And it's good that, we get the local feel, or we don't miss out on the context that way. So I always have a local team engaged, I don't like to have the approach that we go there, study, come back, give some reports, and unless you are engaged, because even for conservation, it is a long-term thing, even if we do some work, for it to be sustainable for life, they need a local engagement, who's caring about it.
Yes. Absolutely.
So, but that's what India is a great place for such diverse.
Very rich in culture and heritage, ma'am. Very rich in culture and heritage. Absolutely.
So currently we are doing this museum in Kolkata. It's the Indian, it's a museum for National Library, a Ministry of Culture project in the Belvedere Estate, very nice heritage building. But this museum is a museum on Indian languages. So it's, because our team is working on the diversity of languages, so one is getting more aware of the extent, of knowledge in India, because most of our knowledge resides in the languages, which we are losing also.
Yes,
Ma'am, there is a question in the chat box. She's asking that the Jali work documentation is very extensive, ma'am. Are there any programs where students come in direct contact with the artisans and learn from their knowledge bank?
Okay, I thought I was answering the first question I've done. They wanted the link to the website. So the Jali work documentation is very... there is no, we can, if required by a college when they are visiting Jaipur, we can organize, a walk through the stone, they call it Khazane Walo Ka Rasta, where they can see the people working there and they can interview and all. So if any of the colleges want that, we've done it. My local team there organizes the complete interaction and all. So if anybody wants field exchange, we have done those kind of stone crafts workshops with like CSMVS. They had an art conservation, stone art conservation thing. So we've organized these workshops. And so that's possible.
So, ma'am, if we ever had a college trip to Jaipur, then we can integrate that into the itinerary.
Sure. Neat.
There is one more question, ma'am, by Poonam Khan. That, ma'am, you mentioned that paintings reveal a lot and give a lot of information. What are the other ways of deciphering past knowledge during the process of conservation?
Yeah, that's a good question, because we use all the methods. First is the archival documents, so sometimes they are in the local language, the Bahidas or the local, because the bards used to record. So that is one, the texts that were there of that time. Then second is the paintings. Now paintings is not available everywhere. Somewhere they had the painting tradition, then you are lucky because lot is recorded. They work like architectural drawings today, so like, therefore we were lucky to have so many paintings that recorded everything. But otherwise the archival text, the old maps whenever from British period onward, they are available. But I also showed you previous maps, like you have in the Jain and the Buddhist philosophy, you have a lot of paintings and maps that were made. So those are also relevant. And lastly, like even if you're doing more recent buildings is like Gandhi Bhavan, the oral history. Like in Gandhi Bhavan with Pierre Jeanneret, there were, architects who were 90 years old who worked with him, and we could record them to understand how he designed the building. So the oral recording is very important, oral history. And even with craftspeople, today you will find some 90, 100 years old. It's very important to do a video recording, oral recording, to get that knowledge, otherwise it will just be lost once they are gone.
Ma'am, Dr. Prasanna, she's asking for this website link.
I wrote it, jaipurworldheritage.com.
Okay.
Yeah.
Ma'am, these old stone crafts and this thing, are there any workshops? Like a lot of our students go on these tours to Rajasthan to study this thing. Did you come across any workshops that these artisans are doing there?
Yeah. That's what I just mentioned, that whenever
About the
you
Jali, Khazano
yeah. Khazane Walo Ka Rasta is more
Yeah.
about stone sculptures. The Jali work is in Makrana near Ajmer.
Yeah.
So, the documents that I mentioned, the resource directory has the name of craftspeople in various places across Rajasthan.
Okay.
So if you source that, you could, or if you let us know, then we can just say who is currently there or give you the contact details.
Okay.
But you have workshops everywhere, like Sikandra, Jodhpur, Jaisalmer, Ajmer, Kishangarh is the place, and Jaipur.
Yeah.
I think our next speaker is here, ma'am.
Okay, ma'am.
Okay,
Thank you very much, ma'am. Thank you very
Sure.
much.
Thanks. Bye.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Gitanjali, ma'am, you can start, please.
Yeah. So good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
So can I start, sir?
Yes, please. Please.
Let me introduce you first. Is my screen visible?
Yes, it is.
So welcome, sir, to you on this FTP. So I would take this opportunity to introduce Professor Dr. Anurag Varma. He is the Executive Director of Liberal Arts and Humanities Cluster at Chandigarh University, and is the Principal Architect in a self-owned design and planning consulting firm. His expertise includes spatial planning, urbanism, heritage conservation, and architecture design of buildings. So we welcome you here, sir, on this FTP. Thank you so much for being part of this FTP.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much. Can I begin now?
Yes, sir, yes.
All right. A very good afternoon to all the participants. I hope that you've been enjoying the sessions that we've been having in this faculty development program. I believe we've had some excellent speakers here. And what I intend to do in this particular session is to kind of summarize, to kind of draw upon what the other speakers have talked about, and try and find a cogent way forward in which we as academicians can move, right? So I'll be presenting to kind of presenting a pathway on how we can actually apply the learnings of this FDP to contribute to the cause of mainstreaming the Indian knowledge systems, right? So this is a brief context. Is my screen being visible now?
Yes, sir, it is visible, sir.
All right.
But sir, your voice is cracking a little bit.
Is it okay now?
Yes, sir. Yes, it is okay.
All right. Actually, it's been showing that it's a partially unstable connection. So maybe it's cracking because of that. But otherwise, I think the audio, is it clear now?
Yes, sir, it is clear.
All right, thanks. Okay. Now, thank you very much, the Council of Architecture, TRC Bhopal, for giving me this opportunity to to deliver a session in this FDP on understanding Indian knowledge systems as applicable in the architecture and planning. And for the closing session, I'll be talking about the potential of Indian knowledge systems with the architecture pedagogy. And we'll be having some kind of deliberations for the implementation of whatever we've been able to learn here, right? So with the expectation that we've been able to learn substantially this potential and the scope of the subject, which is phenomenally high, we'll need to deliberate upon how we can, as educators, and how we can, as architecture schools, contribute to the cause of rediscovery and mainstreaming and imbibe the Indian knowledge systems. So the structure of a session will be that first, just for perception of what I'm going to talk about, is that we need to differentiate Indian knowledge systems from other similar sounding concepts. So this will be a brief introduction and a kind of a summary or some kind of a definition which will help to understand that what we mean if I'm saying Indian knowledge system. The second is that we'll be exploring the need of integrating the Indian knowledge systems with the academics and the pedagogy. The third will be more specific, wherein we'll be driving and arriving at the need of Indian knowledge systems and its integration with architectural education. And as educators in the domain of architecture, I'll be seeking your suggestions also, and I'll be offering a few of my own through which we think that Indian knowledge systems of architecture can be driven through the academics. And the last would be the IKS and architecture education integration. We'll be positing a few suggestions on the way forward. So the first segment now, we'll be wanting to differentiate IKS, Indian knowledge systems. That means we are wanting to clarify amongst ourselves that what the Indian knowledge systems are. Once I'm talking about Indian knowledge systems, possibly make it clear as to me talking about. So the first thing I'd like to elaborate upon is that this FDP has been able to give you different perspectives on the knowledge systems, or else it has talked about different aspects of the Indian knowledge system in its integration with the architecture pedagogy or the architecture practice or the way architecture was produced in traditional times. So there are four distinctive things that we looked into. One was the exegesis of Indian knowledge systems in architecture and built environment. So for a few of us who would have been uninitiated into the Indian knowledge systems, I think it was important for us to understand what the knowledge system means and how do we position our profession, our vocation of architecture in the built environment into this flow of the knowledge systems. So we've had Professor Joy Jain and we've had Professor Pankaj Saxena and Professor Pillai who talked about these things. Professor Joy Jain had touched about the entire spectrum of the traditional Indian knowledge system, and it made us understand the breadth and width of the knowledge systems and the kind of profundity that our knowledge systems had. It also helped us establish the kind of interrelationships between our domain, that is architecture and the built environment, with respect to other specific knowledge domains. So I think it was very important there. Mr. Pankaj Saxena had talked about the manifestation of these kind of traditional flows into sacred architecture. Professor Pillai had been more specific about how this gets translated through a project into the practice and the practice. The second part, looking into the characteristics of Indian traditional law, her erudition was clear. I think it gave us a very good starting point on how do we seek entry to the Indian knowledge systems if we are totally uninitiated in this particular domain. Because this is the problem that I had been facing after we had heard Professor Joy Jain, that to a person who's not very initiated in knowledge systems, how do we gain a toehold to drive to? One is to learn, and the second is how to transfer this information to the students. And his advice was to formulate a team, engage some young people, some students and some faculty members together to explore this knowledge and then subsequently drive it. The third was more specific, and they were looking into, apart from this, Professor talked about the Kshetra dimension, that is about regions. There were different regions in India which have been identified, which are not necessarily to do with the contemporary political boundaries that we've identified. All right. So, which means that we are not talking about the state of Uttar Pradesh. We are not talking about the state of Madhya Pradesh. Maybe instead we are talking about the region, we are talking the region of Bundelkhand, because it has been a changing geography of various having different political boundaries throughout the ages, right? The next process, which was covered yesterday, and then Professor Vishakha had also talked about the way it was manifested in Indian temples. The session today by Professor Kailash and the session yesterday by Professor Deve looked into the process of identification of these things, the traditional heritage which could contribute for us to understand these things, to gain a toehold through these buildings to reach the knowledge systems. And second was that what are the contemporary methods to do it? This we executed. We thought that maybe it will be good for the architect, for this faculty to understand how forward ways are there in the institution. The reason here is that we've got a lot of students together with us. We've got a lot of thinking brains of faculty members. So we've got a very energetic and very innovative force which can engage with this idea and take this forward. And knowledge management, we've had this session by Professor Shikha, and this one is the next. I'm going to speak more specifically on how to do pedagogical processes. Now, how do we differentiate Indian knowledge systems? I'd like you to be able to give a few answers here, right? I'm going to put up a few similar sounding concepts, and I'd like you to put in your chat box as to what do you tend to think about it. Now, one is the Indian knowledge system. A similar thing is it analogous with traditional knowledge, or is it different somehow? The third is the traditional practices. Now, is there a difference, or are they all the same? I'd like you to reflect on this. Now, before we talk about the traditional knowledge, I'll just briefly explain through definitions. Definitions because I think we'll be alluding to the same idea if we are talking about traditions. So what is a tradition? So for my understanding and for your understanding of the word, at least for this exchange, a tradition is a way of thinking, behaving, or doing something that has been used by the people in a particular group, family, society for a long time. So that means if we pray in a certain manner, or else we do farming in a particular manner, in case we've got a thought process that studies is a very good thing to do, in terms of behaving, let's say the values that we must be respectful towards the seniors or our parents or our elderly. So these are the kind of patterns, if we do it for a long time in a group or a family or a society, we say that these are the traditions which are being followed by a group, a family, or a society. All right. So this is what we mean if we are talking about tradition. And the next dimension is what is actually knowledge. What is it when we are saying that traditional knowledge? So knowledge is understanding of an information about a subject that you get experience or study. That means we are learning about something, a subject or an object through experience or study. There are certain things we learn by experience, and there are certain things that we study to gain knowledge, right? Either known by one person or by the people generally. Now, this is a definition of knowledge. Now, what exactly is the process of eliciting this, of obtaining this knowledge? Now, very broad, there are 3 different levels on the basis of which we obtain knowledge. First of all is the knowledge gained through our 5 senses. That means, look at building, let's say we look at Taj Mahal or we look at a Kailasa temple, we get some knowledge out of that. We maybe start admiring the proportions, maybe we understand the materials, maybe we start understanding the composition, maybe we start understanding its utility, maybe we start wondering about the construction systems. This is only the visual process. In addition to that, all these 5 senses, there are these tactile senses, the touch, sense, visual, hearing. So all these are methods through which we learn. Now, these 5 senses are not all through which we learn. The second is through the intellect. Because if we look at something, a higher order or some kind of a analysis, some kind of a synthesis occurs with happening because of the information that we gain through 5 senses. The moment we apply our mind to this, the moment we apply our intellect to this, we reach at a place wherein possibly we are able to start looking at the patterns which are happening. For instance, let's say if we look at a house which has a courtyard,
So your voice is breaking.
Analysis is the way of the intellect, and the third level of knowledge is the knowledge that is
I think Professor Dr. Anurag sir has. So you were disconnected, sir. So you are on mute, sir. So you are on mute. Yes, sir.
Yes, could they hear the second one, intellect?
Yeah. No, sir.
The first
No,
one,
sir.
five senses?
Yes, yes, yes. It was that.
It was. All right. So the second one was about learning through the exercise of intellect. That means application of mind. So I'd given an example of houses being put together and establishing a pattern. All right. So this pattern or these repetitive orders are things that we rationalize through application of our intellect. All right. So that means scientific process of gaining knowledge is through the exercise of intellect. Okay. The third level of knowledge, which is the intuitive knowledge, is from the spirit. You can say that things like music cannot be. Is it being audible now? Because it's again showing that my internet connection is not audible.
Sir, it is clear, but I can say that if you switch off your video, then it would be smooth, sir.
All right, I'll do that.
Just try that, sir, then I'll let you know.
All right. Is it better now?
Yes, yes, sir, it is better. Are you speaking?
Am I being audible?
Yes, yes, sir. Yes, sir. Are you speaking something, sir? We can't hear you, sir.
No, I'm not. Is it being seen?
Yes, sir. It is, sir. It can be seen. The
The
slides are
next
there.
level is the intuitive knowledge. Let's say if you are learning music or anything which is a right-brained activity,
Fatima, can you hear, sir?
Can't hear him.
No, ma'am, we can't hear him. He's breaking in between. Now he's not here.
Yeah, I think he has to reconnect or rejoin. So you are not audible. So you are on mute.
Am I being audible now?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Is it being seen?
Yes, sir.
I'm sorry, it's a bad connection.
Yes, sir.
So it went off. Right. So the third level of knowledge is intuitive knowledge. This is all the right-brained activity. I think it falls within the category. And you can also understand, maybe if you start looking at driving a bike, you cannot drive a cycle through exercise of your intellect or through the principles of physics. You can apply the principles of physics after you learn how to drive a bicycle. All right. So that is how it is. So this is known to be much more superior. And a lot of erstwhile scientists have talked very highly about the knowledge which is gained intuitively. The third is the knowledge which is getting created by reflection through the exercise of smriti, which is equivalent to memory, through the exercise of prayog, which is about implementation or experimentation, and vimarsh through dialogue. So these are the different methods to which we gain knowledge. And the third is traditional practices. Now, I'd like you to write in your chat box, in case you can differentiate between the three. What is a knowledge system? What is a traditional knowledge? What are traditional practices? And is there some kind of correlation between the three? Would you volunteer, or else you can switch on and speak up? Is there any kind of comprehension you have that whether these are similar, whether one is a greater thing and the other one is a subset? Do you have any opinion on this?
They're not very expensive. I have 1.9 lakhs.
Hello?
Yes. Because down.
So please continue.
Is there anyone who wants to talk about this?
No, sir, the mic was on, so I have made it off. Somebody else, my mic was on.
All right, okay. So any comments you are wanting to share about the relationship between Indian knowledge system, the traditional knowledge of India, or the traditional practices of India? Would someone want to speak about this? Do you think?
Hi,
yes.
sir.
Hello?
I think the common thing between all three of these systems are that it's mostly empirical knowledge, which has been being passed on to, one generation to another generation. And unfortunately, I mean, most of it is lost also because it's also related to caste. Because the caste system was a very big problem, because of which lots of documentation didn't happen. So this is just my observation. Right, sir.
Right. I think you're very correct once you are saying the common thing is most of it was empirical. The other way to put it is that it was mostly through observations and experiences. All right. Now, what is that? Is that the knowledge? Is that a knowledge? What makes a knowledge system? What is the difference between the two? Would you want to volunteer on this?
I'm talking about the information. Once the information is applied, I think then it becomes knowledge.
Could you elucidate this through an example?
For example, if I'm learning ragas from my teacher, so they won't teach me the theory like how they teach in Western classical music, right? They have sheet music, and then they tell you this is how to read music. They will tell me just by singing. And once I start, applying that information using my own voice, then it becomes knowledge.
Absolutely. Very, very correct. I think this is very similar to what Mr. Pankaj had talked about. It's a lived experience with you. What you are saying is applied. I'll say it becomes a living experience with you. It's not a theoretical construct in your mind, which you read, or else you rationalized intellectually, or else you are gathering through your senses. This is something that you've lived, because once you've learned it well and you are singing, if you've reached a stage, you are the music, right? So most of the people used to say ki if, let's say, Lata Mangeshkar or Bhimsen Joshi or any of these people who are the highest exponents of their craft, to them it's a different level of experience only, and you embody the knowledge that time. So in India in particularly, it's not an intellectual rationalization thing, it's an intuitive knowledge which has been emphasized upon more. And I think this basic difference had been very well brought out through Professor Joy Sen's session also. Hai na? Do you recall the things that they've talked about?
Right, sir, right.
Hai na? So I think you've explained it very well. Now, if this thing is there, do you think this musical thing will be a part of the Indian knowledge system?
Sir, if we document it, and I mean, I think one thing that lots of speakers have talked about is that how British, education system has wiped out lots of the knowledge that we had.
Yes.
But I think it actually started way before that, at least 600-700 years ago, before Britishers came, especially during 14th century, because lots of invasions started to happen. So lots of, temples were not just temples, but they were also institutions where certain crafts were practiced and certain things were being taught. So so once you destroy the temple, you also destroy an institution. So I think lots of documentation is missing.
There are different perspectives there, and it's interesting that you're talking about it, because that is one perspective which can hold true, because there are things which can be lost. But the point is ki if the people are embodying the knowledge, the manifest forms can be created, right? So there are people like Sompuras who embodied these knowledges. So in case Dilwara temple would have been affected adversely, these are the people who can recreate the magic. Why? Because the knowledge is not there in the manifest. The custodians of knowledge are the people. And as it's very interesting the way you are talking. Why? Because a lot of the speakers have also elucidated very well upon the transmission of the knowledge. So it's not that we need to perpetuate the manifest, right? It has been an oral tradition, mostly.
Definitely, sir.
A lot of speakers have talked about it. It's an oral tradition. So it's being, or else in the case of crafts, it works together with a Guru Shishya Parampara, so that you are attached in a Gurukul with a Guru and you learn things there. In case it's a skill, you are attached to the artisan of the highest order and you imbibe the skill. And then you become that person. You are the person who's skilled most. You are the person who are the embodiment of the knowledge. So you can always tend to recreate. And I think that is where this effort of mainstreaming the knowledge systems requires us to be very aware of this fact. Key, the systems through which we've been building our buildings and cities before, let's say, the 17th, 18th century, that entire process is lost to us. When I'm saying us, I'm talking about the architects of the kind that you and I are, who have a B.Arch degree, right? Why? Because maybe 60 to 70% are still building their habitats in spite of us being there, right? A lot of it is there. A lot of construction is happening in the domain of so-called non-trained architects or self-help groups, or else lesser qualified people or things like that. So that means at one level, there is something which is perpetuating, but we are not familiar with what is happening over there. what were the vernacular practices, what were the local practices, and what were the greater traditions? What were the traditions which were being followed at a larger scale? All right. So I think it's a very good example that you cited. And is there a difference between the knowledge and the practices also?
So knowledge and practices, for example, if you look at the bylaws, since we are talking about the contemporary, building systems and planning issues, if you look at bylaws, I think these kind of systems have been set up irrespective of most of it. This is my personal opinion. I mean, lots of people can disagree, and I'm fine with this. But lots of systems have been developed irrespective of the knowledge system that we already had.
Yes.
To give you a regional example from where I'm coming from, if you look at how, they don't talk about the kind of materials, but they talk about the kind of colors that you have to use in the roof in Himachal. In bylaws, either has to be green or red. So this is, and it doesn't make any sense. Like, why green and red only? I have no idea. So I think if we look back and then we frame these kind of policies and bylaws, I think it could be very helpful for us.
I think you're absolutely spot on. It's like, hum agar aarti kar rahe hain and we don't know why are we doing it, then we've lost the knowledge behind that, but we are perpetuating the practice of doing it, right? So what you are suggesting is we must try and learn, where does this evolve from? What are the depth? What is the kind of depth which is there to a practice? Ascertain its contemporary relevance and then move forward, isn't it?
Definitely, sir.
Absolutely. Fantastic. I think this has been a fantastic opening. So now what we are going to do is that for the purpose of this exchange that we are going to have, for the purpose of this session, we are going to talk about what do we mean the IKS is, right? So if we are saying Indian knowledge systems, Indian, right? Now, what do we mean once we are talking about Indian? Is it about the political map of India? Now, we need to understand that civilizations and the civilizational and the cultural boundaries do not necessarily overlap the state political boundaries that we have right away. Is this point agreed to, or is there some kind of a contest to this?
For sure, sir, because if we look at history, the Gandhara school of sculpture, which was founded by Ashoka, that's Afghanistan now, but it was part of our culture.
Yes, and maybe we've learned through that, and maybe it may be in practices in some places here. A lot of it got translated into sculpture also. And that's also, once we are talking about, for the purpose of, if we are talking about Indian knowledge systems, we are talking about a historical entity when we were at the zenith of our civilizational achievements or accomplishments, right? What people allude to Akhand Bharat. So that means we are talking about parts of maybe from the Northeast, we are talking about the parts of Burma, we are talking about Afghanistan, we're talking about Pakistan, we are talking about Sri Lanka. So we are talking about Bhutan, Nepal, and these kind of areas wherein we've had our footprints and we've had forces and flows which affect the way we understand knowledge today. All right. So for the purpose of this deliberation, for the purpose of this session, if we are talking about IKS, we are talking about the knowledge which was embodied in India in a civilizational perspective. All right. The second is, a few of this were covered when you were speaking. What are the characteristics of knowledge? So one is that it's tacit. It's understood without being expressed directly. I think, was it Mr. Karan who was speaking earlier?
Yes, sir.
Yes. So I think this is something that he had also expressed, and it arises in the form of wisdom of the knowledge seekers. So that means if we are the initiated, we may be the educators, we may be the skilled craftspeople, we may be experimental, we may be the scientists. So the wisdom that we acquire, that is the knowledge that we are talking about. The third is that experiences with life situations. We've talked about that. Reflection, we maybe talked about 3 things. So our personal experiences also help gain knowledge. At other times, it could be observations of events through experimentations or all. Maybe, would you ever imagine how could the people who are doing astronomy, or we do have Khagol Shastra, how could they understand about maybe the speed of light or the distance of the moon, or maybe the kind of planetary constellations and things like that, sitting here when we didn't have any telescope or long view or long viewing these observatories. So it's a sense of wonder that how do you do it? So it's about through observation, reflection, and application of your intuitive capabilities. So it may or may not get converted to a literary format. So it's not necessary for it to be converted to a literary format, but it may get converted to a literary format also. Like if we've got Vedas, if we've got Upanishads, if we've got Vedangas, if we've got an entire corpus of all these things, Puranas and everything, it may get converted to a literary format, but let's need to understand all of this arises from the wisdom of the knowledge seekers. It's normally tacit, which was largely transmitted through oral tradition, which is the next point here. And literary sources are only a formal repository of the knowledge. That means what we are saying is that the knowledge repository is finally the person who is learning it. If let's say I have a book here, the book could mean different things to different people. I think we all understand, in case I am conducting this session here, the learning for each of you can be different, isn't it? It will be different. Why? Because you've got your own perspectives and you're all thinking people. So whatever I'm saying, even if you're not really very argumentative or you're not thinking with a closed mind, you will definitely understand whether you agree to this. Finally, your takeaway would be something which will be exclusively yours. So that means the knowledge lies with the person who is seeking that. A book remains a book, right? So this book is an explicit knowledge. And the moment it gets converted into a theory or a framework or a literary work, it becomes a system. So let's say if I learn how to do buildings, okay? So I learn how to do buildings means that I can design a building maybe. So as contemporary architects, once we move out into the profession, we'll need to understand whether we can construct the building also. The next, we also need to think whether we can do the water pipes, maybe can we do the electrical lines and things like that. The moment I learn about everything which encompasses a building, I can say that I have understood the system of doing a building. All right. So the difference is that learning about the design is a knowledge, but it's a knowledge, a part of a knowledge that I've learned. The moment I learn it in entirety, I possibly can have some kind of a treatise or some kind of explicit knowledge, which then becomes a knowledge system. For those of you who are engaged in a result, in research, if you start off with some kind of a hypothesis and that gets converted into theory, it becomes a knowledge system. In case someone's lying in a tub and he understands the principles of buoyancy and he gets out of the tub and runs the entire town saying Eureka, that means he understood the principle first. He has implicitly or instinctively or intuitively learned about the principle of buoyancy. Its scientific exposition or explicit knowledge is what will be considered a knowledge system. All right. So one thing is that this IKS, the knowledge will be emanating from the wisdom and insights out of deep experiences. It's not as if I'm lying in the tub thinking about buoyancy. It's about deep experiences wherein there has been a long period of observation and experimentation, which was analyzed and validated, improved and augmented further. So this experience of lying in a tub to the principle of buoyancy is conversion of some gained wisdom or insight through the process of experience, observation, experimentation, analysis, validation, to create a knowledge system. Now, this is one example. Please don't say that this is the scientific system. No, this within the scientific system, this is one of the principles. This is just to explain an idea. And this is what is going to get cleared here. The IKS made the system part. It's a structured methodology and a classification scheme to access the vast corpus of knowledge, right? So we possibly might have heard that there was this huge corpus which was already available, and Maharshi Vedvyas brought it all together, synthesized it in the form of 18 granthas, right? So that means this knowledge is getting organized. In a contemporary scenario, what do you think the library classification system does? In case there would not have been any classification system or library science would not have been developed, then, and we've got, let's say, 50,000 books in a library, do you think we can learn through that? No. If there are plenty of observations, can we derive a kind of a observation or analysis or synthesis from there? No, I think that is where this artificial intelligence, this data analytics is coming up now. Why? Because we are generating a lot of data and we know that through a human effort, we'll be unable to understand this. So the new kind of structured methodology, which we are using to analyze the huge data that we are generating these days, is something that we are calling data analytics, right? So what we are saying, the systems are structured methodologies and classification schemes to access the corpus of knowledge, because the vastness, the phenomenon, the expanse of knowledge can intimidate us. And because of that, the knowledge has to be collected, grouped, and arranged logically. If we go back to the classification systems of a library, and we are talking about architecture and built environment, we'll understand that there are subcategories which talk about architecture design, which talk about architectural construction, which talk about architectural history, which helps us to find books on architectural history, architectural design, architectural services, and the lot. So this systemization means that we organize this knowledge in a manner so that it's retrievable and can become a learning resource. All right. And IKS seeks to delve into this vast corpus of wisdom and knowledge, which is available in various domains in the Indian context. All right. And mainstream it. So our entire effort of this FDP is that as educators, we should be able to understand this entire concept of Indian knowledge systems, one, and second, we should be able to position our profession or our domain of expertise within this larger flow of knowledge so as to inquire into it and gain from it. All right. Make sense? Is it comprehensible till now? Are we clear on what we are talking about if we are talking IKS, and why is it that we are doing it? Is this understood? You can use the chat box also, or else if there's a query, please put it up now in your chat boxes. All right, no comments and no responses, I guess. Either you're too tired or else maybe, I'm making a lot of sense. So we just move further from this. Now, I'd like you to do something, because at least I'll want you to participate in some manner. Now, can you identify through examples the areas of convergence and divergence between the three? Now, Mr. Karan had already talked about a few of the areas which were convergent. Is there a difference between them? I think you'll be able to understand the kind of set and subset correlation that exists between the two, right? That the Indian knowledge system is the larger umbrella within which there are traditional knowledge flow and the practices, which is mainly exercised through the skills. All right. So there are these two can be assumed to be subsets of the system, and it becomes a system when it becomes classified. Now, if you start looking at closely in the domain of architecture, are we really aware that what is it that we need to study in case we are delving into the knowledge systems for Indian architecture? Now, in the previous sessions, a few of the resources had been suggested, right? We know that there's Sthapatya Ved, we know there's Samrang Sutradhar, and there are different texts which talk about architecture, but what initiates us into this? Now, this is where I think we need to understand as educators what is it that we need to learn, and second is after we learn, how do we transmit it? Now, how do we learn actually? The question is, how do we learn? So before that, I'll just summarize a few things. Okay. So the Indian knowledge system refers to a broad array of philosophical, scientific, and cultural knowledge which was developed and practiced in the Indian subcontinent over time. We know a lot of these knowledge systems, which include Ayurveda, Yoga, Jyotish, Vastu Shastra is the one which is relevant for us. And I think the brief lecture by architect Shashi Kalanand on Vastu Shastra as the Indian science of building is something which would have been very well understood by people, by all the participants of this. Why? Because it helps us to design and build up and develop the build forms which are in harmony with the natural environment and the cosmic energies. Normally, these knowledge systems, each of these, are transmitted through oral narratives, written texts in a few incidences, and a Guru Shishya Parampara, which is about personal tutelage. Traditional, and this is in distinction with traditional knowledge, wherein traditional knowledge is slightly smaller on scale, which refers to the knowledge which is passed down from generation to generation within a particular community. Now, you may question whether it's only a particular community. Don't we have traditions which are pan-Indic, which are followed everywhere and anywhere in India? Now, there are different ways to look at it, right? The emphasis of each of these knowledge traditions or the traditions which we follow, the emphasis is different. The location of these traditions are different. And that is why we are not saying that India is a huge country with a great diversity of traditions, a great diversity in the knowledge. There is this idea of little traditions and greater traditions also. So greater traditions are the ones which pervade theoretically all over India. Something like the Krishna festival, or else a few festivals, that means the New Year, the Hindu New Year, which has its own methods to be celebrated in different parts of the country. And then there are little traditions. That means we are talking about variations of these greater traditions. Let's say if Ramayana is one greater tradition, then its exposition, the way it's practiced, the way it's conveyed, the way it's communicated, as a performing art, or else as a ritual, or else as a practice, in Rohilkhand will be different from Bundelkhand, will be different from Devbhumi in Uttarakhand, or else Himachal, right? So what we are saying that it's passed from the generation to generation within a particular community based on their experiences and practices, also because the context for each of us is different. If Rajasthan, let's say we take up an example of dwelling units, if I go to Rajasthan, stone is available. So even with the similar set of knowledge systems, because I have stone available, I'll start to learn through experience and practices to excel in stone. In case I am in the Himalayas, I'll start looking at rubble, I'll start looking at timber, I'll start looking at straw as construction materials. In case I am in the alluvial plains, I'll start looking at clay, and the alluvial soil is a construction material, right? So maybe the belief system or the knowledge system remains similar, but the moment we start traveling and there's diffusion of culture, we start adapting to the kind of context we have. So we are saying that traditional knowledge is passed from generation to generation within a community, particular community, based on their experiences and practices. So it includes local, mind the word local, ecological knowledge, traditional medicines. That means the medicines which are available in particular places. I guess you're already aware of the geographical significance and the process of patenting of these kind of medicines, and the craft techniques and other examples. So these can be referring to building materials, techniques and designs and things like that. This is again transmitted through cultural identities. Cultural identities implies the way a community looks at itself. All right. And we need not have a single cultural identity. Within a particular community also, there can be shared identities and there can be difference in identities. For example, between a parent and his offspring, they belong to the same family. A lot of belief system is shared, but maybe the parent is a teetotaler and this child doesn't think there's anything wrong in having alcohol. So the belief system, there's a shift somewhere, right? So the dominant identity that we are the same people is there even with the family. But then there are divergent ways in which we identify with each other, or in our belief systems, we can have partial shifts. So we can have an agnostic child of a very faithful parent. All right. So it's transmitted normally through cultural identities or else orally or through experience. And traditional practices refer to the customs, beliefs, and rituals, which again are transferred from generation to generation. And they're very often deeply rooted in history and can be observed in the domains of cuisine, clothing, music, art, religion, and the social norms. So this is a brief definitional aspect which has been extracted from the narrative that we've just had. All right. Basically, we are spelling out how do we understand this. Now, if we look at the knowledge management frameworks, then these two things are basically explaining a similar idea. And I'll also share why is it that I'm showing it. One is that we are differentiating I-case. I-case means there is an element of discovery, maybe not directly of the knowledge system. Maybe we can start learning from small monuments to small group of monuments to interaction with divergent communities who've been inhabiting that built environment, and then discover the cultural beliefs and customs which gave rise to a particular thing, right? So initially, maybe when we are capturing, it can be a bit of information. I guess it will be instructive if I also talk about these 4 categories of knowledge. So one could be the data. The moment you are able to apply some mind to it, it becomes, from data, it becomes some kind of information. From information, data, information. I think the third one I'm forgetting, data, information. The fourth is wisdom. Wisdom is the category of knowledge systems. The first one is data. Data ke baad there's information. I'm forgetting the third one. Data, information, knowledge, and wisdom. Data, the moment you are able to identify some patterns, all right, it becomes information. You start looking at information from various sources. You are able to reach a level of knowledge, which is through intellectual rationalization. And the moment you built up your intuitive knowledge and experience into it, it becomes wisdom. So the 4 categories which are scalar and which are moving in a higher dimension is data, information, knowledge, and wisdom. So the 2 sketches here are basically placing the knowledge system at the apex and the practices and the methods there only. Now, all right, so we move further. What is the need of IKS? Academia integration. Now, any ideas on why should we integrate IKS with academia, with academics, with our teaching learning processes? Now, I'll give you different perspectives to that, and you can think about it also. Now, the first is, I guess we are all educators here, so we'll know ki as a background, the National Education Policy 2020 recognizes the rich traditional knowledge which is embedded in the cultural heritage of India. And it thinks that the cultural awareness and expression amongst the faculty members and amongst the students can be the major competencies which can help us develop cultural identity and self-esteem. So at a very broader perspective is about construction of identities. It's also about enhancing our self-esteem. So what the NEP talks about is achieving competencies which are more abstract. In terms, we are saying that it helps us to develop self-esteem and cultural identities, but definitely help us to be more aware and help us to be more knowledgeable. All right. So this is the background of the NEP. Now, again, there are a few specific things about the NEP wherein they are elaborating that the knowledge of India will include knowledge for ancient India and also its contribution to modern India and its successes and challenges. So that means we are not looking at knowledge which is fossilized. We are looking at knowledge which is living. We are looking at knowledge which is making a difference to our present. We are looking at knowledge which can improve upon the conditions of living, the way we are staying, the conditions of our contemporary living. We are looking at the way it can contribute to contemporary India to make it a more successful, to make it more successful to address its own challenges. And specifically, if we are looking at academia integration, that the suggestion is that all curriculum and pedagogy from the foundational stage onwards, that means we are not talking only about the higher education in institutes of higher educations. We are talking right from the school. They should all be redesigned to be rooted in the Indian and local context and ethos in terms of culture, traditions, heritage, and customs. Now, this thing about rooted in the Indian and local context. Now, we can explain this in the context of Jaipur. There is a book which has been written by Professor Vibhuti Sachdev and Giles Tillotson, which talks about the making of Jaipur. We all understand that Jaipur has been envisaged or imagined on the basis of Vastu Purush Mandala. All right. Now, if we start, this book talks about the contemporary architects understanding Jaipur through the usage of a contemporary lens. That means if there was this 9 squared things about Jaipur, we start looking at 9 squares as a geometry. We start looking at 9 squares as a rectilinear thing. We start looking at the efficacy because of the 9 squares, whereas we lose out upon the mythical association with these 9 squares does have. We start losing the connect that these 9 squares as an idea had with the cosmic forces. So what we are saying is that the knowledge and the different components of knowledge, let's say if 9 squares had something to do with the cosmology, had something to do with the mythical beliefs, let us ground our investigation in those traditional and Indian context rather than doing a geometrical analysis only. We are not saying that the geometrical analysis should not be done, but it's well elaborated in the book that it's a mental construct through which you keep on improvising the design or else the execution of the city, all right, through the mental construct of a traditional knowledge. So it's like saying I was speaking with some person in Vastu who was saying, what does light mean for you? We talk a lot about smart buildings, and we talk about this energy saving and orientation of buildings as passive energy saving techniques. So he asked me, what do you think about light? I said, to me, it's coming up with two things. It comes up with a lot of heat, and it also comes up with a lot of light. So if I can balance, I'll see the energy consumption. In case I'm saving light, then I'll invite the light. In case I don't need the light and I'm spending much more on cooling the area because of the light coming in, I'll shut it off. But to them, they say we are looking at light as a spectrum and the impact it does have on a human being. Now, I won't elaborate into that further, but I can understand it's a different framework of looking at a phenomenon. That means the sun is setting in the east and is rising in the east, setting in the west. How do we look at it in case we are wanting to design buildings? So our mental constructs are different, right? So we just need to be aware. And once we are aware, I think there has to be a conscious efforts on the part of educators and students to initiate ourselves to learn this and understand whether it's important what is it that is important for us to transmit. Now, there are certain things which are wanting to mainstream the IKS also at a national level. So we do have a national mission of cultural mapping, which recognizes the need for a consolidated data repository of our cultural assets and resources. There is a national mission of manuscripts, which recognizes that the manuscripts constitute the memory of India's history, heritage, and thought. Now start looking at the books like this. No? A book is a memory of a knowledge. That means I'm writing a book. Once I learned something, I'm transcribing it, and you're reading what I experienced. So it's about exposition of a knowledge. It's about exposition of knowledge. So it constitutes and if there are manuscripts, they constitute the memory of India's history, heritage, and thought. The next is Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav. I guess you'll all be very well acquainted with this. We are celebrating and commemorating 75 years of independence of our glorious history. So Indian knowledge system look to promote interdisciplinary research on all aspects of IKS to preserve and disseminate IKS for further research and societal expression applications, right? AICT has also set up a cell for Indian knowledge systems to promote interdisciplinary research, preserve and disseminate IKS, to spread the rich heritage of our country in the domains of art and literature, agriculture, basic sciences, engineering and technology, architecture, management, and economics. Now, coming to a specific question. Is there any query till now? Do we think we are convinced about the integration of Indian knowledge system in our learning systems as well? Do we think there is a lot of value in us learning about these traditional things? We've already attended 5 days of this. Do you want to write something on the chat box, or would you want to speak anything about this? No? I think the teachers are gloriously silent. I always thought that we are paid to speak. But we are all very silent here. It's a good cohort, doesn't question anything or doesn't really talk about. Well, it's a good opportunity to talk. Anyways, we'll just progress further then. What is the need of IKS in architecture education? Now, this is something you'll need to fill up in your chat boxes. Why do you think it's important to integrate IKS with architecture education? And I'm waiting till I get a few answers in the chat box. Please, please, please do write something there, or else people can also start speaking till the time that some others are writing things in the chat box.
So someone has written to
Right.
learn the intangible aspects.
Yes, we should have done the promotion of IKS 50 years
Yes.
back to learn the intangible,
Intangible
aspects.
aspects.
Yes. And take pride in our country's vast knowledge, correct? That's one of the stated objectives also of why we should integrate. That's absolutely spot on. Absolutely, preservation. And the second, the evolution part is again so important. The evolution part is so very important of the existing knowledge, because the moment we fossilize knowledge, it stagnates. It's very, very critical for any knowledge system, for any knowledge flow to evolve. Because if it's stuck up in time, it'll just stagnate. I think that's a very good word to use here, evolution of existing knowledge. That's a very good thought to present. To promote, yes. Discover our lost but rich heritage knowledge, yes, exactly.
So maybe revive.
Absolutely, yes. And only 3 people. Yes. Rediscover bruised or silenced knowledge and work on its application and dissemination to form discourses. Yes.
So take our knowledge.
Vibhuti, could you expand upon this? Rediscover bruised or silenced knowledge and work on its application and dissemination to form discourses. Could you will you want to unmute yourself and talk about it? No? I think that's a good thought. I just thought I should know more about this idea.
So it's just talking in the colonial respect. We learn about Michel Foucault and what he says about normalized knowledge versus the bruised knowledge. So like in the colonial aspect, the colonizers or the invaders have silenced our traditional knowledge systems and we have forgotten our roots. So I think that is a very important part of building identity.
All right. So you're coming from Foucault's thought, right?
Yes, sir.
All right. Okay. Nice. I just wanted to know where were you coming from. So now I know. Good. Take our knowledge system of knowledge to wider platform of globe. Yes. That means not only this, we need to mainstream it and we need to showcase it also. That's great. To establish the scientific aspects which was stamped. Oh, absolutely. There are a lot of scientific aspects which were called mistake. So it's not that we need scientific validation for each of our thoughts, but definitely there is a lot of science which is there to our knowledge. And definitely it will help to make it more palatable, to make it more understandable to people who have different lenses for understanding knowledge. So when I say that, I mean in case I am a rationalist and I don't understand anything apart from science, then science is also one of the approaches to explain certain ideas which are otherwise stamped as mystic. I think that's very well expressed. Navni Kekre has said, understanding our own roots and how we have evolved over time and have forgotten those excellent systems which were once very prevalent and our very own identity. I think this is very well taken. This idea of rootedness, I think it provides us with a lot of psychological succor. And we have changed, but a sense of rootedness makes us understand ourselves better. And that is why the broader idea of this FDP is that we as architecture educators should be able to position ourselves in this flow of mainstreaming Indian knowledge system. So what we are saying is that we need to understand our position within this flow. Similarly, Navni Kekre's idea of understanding our roots is important. Understanding old scripts and traditions which are yet to be discovered, agreed. I think we are getting a lot of good ideas here, which are elaborating about a lot of these things to actually be undertaken by us, right? Okay. So I have also a few things which are more specific to architecture education. So we are saying that this is more from the perspective of its contribution. Why should we as architectural educators try and integrate IKs? So one is that it helps us to set up a systemic observation to develop a professional understanding about the temporal evolution. Temporal evolution means over a period of time of indigenous practices of a place and its contemporary relevance. So that means we can look at the evolution of stonecraft in Rajasthan, understand it professionally, how did it evolve over time, because the initial structure would have been rudimentary and we would have improved over a period of time, and also should be able to place as to how this indigenous practice has a contemporary relevance. So this is one of the professional reasons that I think we as architecture educators should have. The second is, which is connected also to the rootedness, to reconnect with the indigenous knowledge and skills of the traditional builders and explore potential of its integration with their contemporary mainstream. Let's say there are people who are very good at stonecraft, right? Now, that's a kind of a skill which is not very readily finding a very good market these days. And for all we know, we've got these modern tools wherein we can construct, we can 3D print our jolly systems, we can do a CNC cutting on some kind of a surface, we can use some laser techniques to do this. So we need to understand that, is there a need to mainstream these? Is there any integration possible of the craftspersons, of the indigenous skills and knowledge in a modern system of building? And in case there is, we can only think about its mainstreaming in case we know those. So in terms of our education, I see that there's a very little effort for us to connect our students and ourselves with the indigenous skills and knowledge. Now, this is very often reflected in the idea wherein we conduct these training programs for the craftsperson. A person who for let's say 3 or 4 generations have been executing a craft, we conduct training programs for those craftspersons without ourselves indulging into that, right? On the contrary, we can have an approach wherein we can learn from these craftspeople, right? Isn't it? Why? Because they can do marvels with their material, which possibly we cannot. So this is another perspective to hold in mind. The third is through these two things, understanding bits and pieces of the knowledge sources, we can be initiated to comprehend the knowledge systems or practices which underpin the creation of indigenous settlements or buildings, which achieved a very high level of advancement. Let's say the South Indian temples, right? How many of us can really build like that? I think I unfortunately could not attend Professor Kailasa Rao's lecture today, but I'm sure you would have been able to comprehend that what is the kind of system that used to get into the construction of a temple, of a traditional temple, isn't it? Now, there's an entire system of knowledge which is involved there, and possibly engaging ourselves with these manifest heritage properties or heritage settlements or heritage practices or heritage crafts will help us to reach the knowledge systems in case we are not already exposed to them. After knowing these things, we can potentially think about revival of the organic transmission of knowledge for developing of built environments which are more synced with the contemporary demands. And then obviously to inculcate a sense of wonder about our accomplishments in the domain of creation of the built environments, and also to establish its place in civilizational history. Once we are talking about civilizational history, we are talking about all civilizations. We are not restricting ourselves only to the Indian or Indic civilization. So finding the rightful place because of our accomplishments in civilizational history, we'll need to understand that as architects and as architecture educators, we do have a small role there. Now, do you have any now, after possibly having a convergence of the idea of having IKS integrated with the architecture programs, how do you think IKS can be integrated with architecture education? Can you put up a few comments in the chat box, or else someone can respond also simultaneously? You're all educators. You attended this. You would have gained some perspective, if not the details. I'm sure you'll be able to come up with a few examples. How can we exactly do this? Not exactly. Any perspective or any random thought that you have is more than welcome, because we are all groping for a sense of direction. Documentation of Indian heritage, correct? This is one way. How else can we integrate Indian knowledge systems with architecture education? You've seen a lot of examples all through this also. You just need to see that how can it be integrated with the education. Indian planning systems by studying old living cities like Banaras, exactly. So it's not only about a built property, built heritage or a building, it's also about living heritages. Then studying our indigenous crafts. Yes, it could be stonework, it could be woodwork, it could be carving on the stones, it could be about assembly of the stones, it could be using metal for putting stones together, it could be dry masonry, it could be the use of mortar, any kinds of variations, different kinds of practices. Once we put it together, doing an arch or doing a corbel, doing a real arch or doing a corbel, doing a column beam structure, trabeated structure, doing a real dome or doing a corbel dome. Any ideas? I'm sure we cannot be as devoid of ideas. Please come up with your suggestions. All right. I think we need to close also. So in case no one is responding, I will prod any further. So a few ideas that I have. So if we assume that we are custodians of the contemporary state of a place or its built environment, and also as our responsibility as educators, we can take up spatial cognizance of the geographical, archaeological, historical, ecological, spiritual, etc. significance of a place. That means we need to be able to identify that whether it's a pilgrimage town, it's a trading town, whether it's a crafts town. And I think this nomenclature is now coming up big time in the global scenario, wherein we are trying to identify cultural cities, we are trying to identify these kind of cities. So sacred cities, we are trying to identify what we call smart cities, what we also called as ye business wali jo hai, financial capitals, global cities. So this nomenclature is repeating itself now. So first of all, in spite of jumping straight into what is the kind of built fabric, we need to understand something which has been reflected in what is the what do we call it? Christopher Alexander has written about it, and okay, I'm forgetting the word. Something. It'll come. All right. So, what is the place about? What is its significance? So, how does it help us? It helps us, let's say, if we are talking about beautiful hill towns, right? And it's some kind of a recreational place. Now we visit it so often and so large in the numbers that those places are absolutely denuded of any value. Okay. Now, this is one example. Second is to explore the physical and spatial evolution of the place. The third is to identify the temporal layers. Temporal means the different layers over time, layers of accretion of manifest features. By manifest features, I'm talking about things which are seen. Things which are seen as could include buildings, could include spaces in between the buildings, could talk about sacred groves, could talk about riverfront, could talk about water harvesting, things like baulis, kunds and things like that. So identify the temporal layers of accretion of the manifest features, then execute research of built environments through a traditional knowledge or practices framework. It's very important to have the perspective of the Indian knowledge system. Let me share it with you that I've done my master's in architectural conservation. Then I've done my PhD in pilgrimage towns, and it's in kind of stuff, right? Which has a lot to do with traditional knowledge. We need to be very clear whether the kind of study we are executing, is it going to be, let's say if we are studying Banaras, will Kevin Lynch be the best framework to study it? Or Christopher Alexander, or can there be some kind of indigenous framework which is written? Now, there is this book which has come up on Indian knowledge system, which is a good hand by Professor V. Mahadevan, which talks about these different features. It talks about the various knowledge resources. It talks about 15 texts which we need to go through as physical planners, as architects, as spatial planners, to understand what is the kind of lens we need to use if we need to understand the traditional way of construction. So to study what? To research the manifest attributes. This is the physical thing which is seen. The tacit information, that means the knowledge which is embedded, as Professor Joycean had talked about, the semantic and semiotic. Semantic is about the language and semiotic is about the symbols. Semiotic and semantic attributes of a particular building or environment. And the third is the process and agency for the development of a place or a built environment. How do we do it? Now I'll go fast. I think we are short on time. And this is, I think, the last but one slide. Inclusion of the traditional knowledge of Vastu or Sthapatya Vidya in the course curriculum. I think as educators, we all understand this very well. Including insights for Indian knowledge to impart traditional thought, skills, practices, and crafts and teaching of courses, subjects. Now, this can be embedded into the climate studies, principles of design, building geometry, building construction, material application, and different things like that. I think some cogitation or some thought needs to be undertaken on these. This next is to initiate active engagement with traditional architecture and built environments for relating with them as manifest embodiments of traditional knowledge. We are assuming and we know that these traditional buildings are manifest symbols of the culture of a time. Culture includes the beliefs, values, and customs and traditions. So we need to start looking at traditional architecture as such, not only being enamored of the visual dimension of any structure or built environment, but also about the tacit information which it embeds, and initiating advanced study and integrated research on various aspects of traditional knowledge that could include the science of building, proportioning system, material innovation, construction technology, craftsmanship, vernacular terminology, जो local words हैं construction के लिए. How do the people communicate? How does the main master craftsperson hai, how does he communicate ideas with, let's say, the clients, with, let's say, the craftspeople, with say the people who are involved in the building processes? What is the kind of organizational setup which executes a building, how does the knowledge transmit, and how do we synthesize these things, and other linkages with other knowledge traditions as Khagol Shastra and the ecological principles, which was also alluded to by Professor Joyce in his lecture. Is this aspect okay? Then this I've just included here, but with the shortage of time, I'm not getting into the details. The UGC has issued guidelines for the training of trainers, training of faculty members, and this is the draft syllabus for inclusion of IKS induction course on Indian art and architecture, wherein there are three broad divisions. The first one talks about the fundamentals of art and architecture, traditional and historical town planning, and ancient Indian architecture. The second is about the sacred ecology, and the third is about the modern people who contributed to Indic architecture. I think we are beyond this. Suggest topics you deem imperative for inclusion of the draft syllabus for IKS inclusion on ancient art and architecture. Thank you. If there are any questions, I'll be happy to take them on. Thanks a lot. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. It was indeed a wonderful session, and I think the participants were also very active. They wanted to participate, and we had a very good Q&A in between the session, so it was quite interactive also. So participants, if you want to ask any questions, you can put them in the chat box, or you can raise your hand, and you can also unmute yourself. I think, sir, they have enough interaction in between the session.
All right. There's one thing in the chat box. All right.
Thank you for very informative session.
You're most welcome. Thank you.
So thank you so much, sir.
Right. Thanks.
I think Dr. Navneet, he has also joined us. So
hello,
before I introduce sir, Dr. Navneet, I would like to pass on few instructions to the participants. Can I, sir?
Yes, sir. Please.
Yeah.
Welcome, Dr. Navneet.
Sir, namaskar, sir.
आप ही की वजह से हो रहा है ये. We must thank you so much.
Sir,
Anurag, sir, can you please stop sharing?
Yes, I will.
Thank you so much.
Sir,
So dear party.
Yes, ma'am.
Can I pass on few instructions, sir, with due permission?
Yes, madam, please.
Yeah. Dear participants, there are few the instructions which are actually important for all of you. So it is required to score at least 60% marks in the MCQ test and have to fill up a feedback form provided to obtain an e-certificate. So this is very important. Kindly note everyone. So there would be 60 questions in the MCQs, and time duration also would be 60 minutes. So attending all the questions would be mandatory. MCQs would start at 4:30 p.m. sharp, and you all will be receiving emails before that. And the responses will be received till 5:30 p.m. only. So all participants are required to click the submit button after attending all the questions. Otherwise, the answers won't be uploaded. Participants are requested to submit the feedback form by Saturday, 25th March, means tomorrow, 25th March 2023 is required. And the link of the MCQ test and feedback form will be shared in your registered email IDs at sharp 4:30. So you all will be receiving emails. And now I would like that we should introduce the honorable directors, COA-TRC.
Gitanjali, thank you for this. But
so only few words we have written for you also. So we have Dr. Navneet with us.
We can skip this. We don't require this.
Okay, sir. Okay, sir. Okay.
So, sir, thank you, sir. Anurag, sir. I
Thank you
have
so
gone
much.
through your presentation and I was there, but I was on the another system, so that's why you could not see me. It was really wonderful and very impressive. And the title you have covered, I am very happy to see that के जितने अच्छे तरीके से आपने conclude किया उसे. So it's an inspiration for all the participants how to conclude the thing. पिछले 5 दिनों से जो मैराथन चला रहे थे, आपने कितने आसान शब्दों में, हालांकि थोड़ा सा बहुत सारा था उसमें matter. Content was too much, but precisely you have covered and very simple way. So I am impressed with your presentation. So thank you,
so
sir.
much, sir.
Sir. So as per Gitanjali's ma'am instruction, no, I am here to give the concluding report. So thank you. Thank you all of you. Namaskar. On behalf of the Council of Architecture, New Delhi, I, Dr. Navneet Munod, Honorary Director, COA-TRC Bhopal, would like to present the concluding report as well as offer my sincere thankfulness to all the stakeholders who are the part of this 5-day faculty development program on understanding Indian knowledge system in architecture and planning. The first day of this program was started as scheduled on 20th March 2023. Professor Jain, who took the inaugural session on institutionalization and capacity building for integration of IKS in architecture and town planning with teaching, learning, and pedagogy. The session 2 was on situating built heritage as expression and manifestation of traditional knowledge system in India. The presentation was given by Professor Pankaj Saxena. In the third session of the second day was taken by Dr. Harimohan Pillai on context, characteristics, and conservation on Indian knowledge tradition of architecture and town planning. In the session 4 on the day 2, Dr. P.V. Rana started his session on landscape architecture, sacred sites, and cosmic geometry, examples of Indian knowledge systems. In the 5th session that was delivered by Ms. Shashikala Anand, where she talked about an introduction to Vastu, Indian science of architecture. The next session was conducted by Dr. Vishakha on characteristics of sacred architecture of India. The 7th session was taken by Dr. Mansi Bal Bhargava, and she talked about knowledge of traditional water management system in India. The 8th session on the day 4 was started by Mr. Divya Gupta on discovering, identifying, inventorying, and grading of built heritage. Today, that is the final day of this FDP. The first session on the day 5 was on advanced contemporary tools and techniques for documentation of tangible cultural heritage. That was taken by Dr. Kailasa Rao. And the next session was covered by Dr. Shikha Jain on education, research, and outreach of the Indian knowledge system. And as Anurag sir is there, the last session was taken by him. That was on conclusion and way forward to Indian knowledge system. We are really glad that we could conduct this 5-day faculty development program as per its original schedule. And for the same, I heartily congratulate to all of you for the amazing efforts that you have taken and the sheet will you have displayed for making this program an enriching one. On behalf of the TRC Bhopal, I congratulate and thanks to all the program coordinators and moderators. Architect Anurag Varma, Architect Swati Bel Uppal, Architect Vikas Chand Sharma, Architect Manujit Khurana, and Architect Gitanjali Kapoor for taking all the responsibility from last 3 months to coordinate this 5 days program by consistently taking some time out from their busy schedule. In the last but not least, I would thank all my delegates and experts who were the part of this 5-day events. Thank you. Namaskar. Over to you, Gitanjali ma'am.
So,
Thank you, sir.
Finally, we are wrapping up the session with the vote of thanks. So I, Professor Gitanjali Kapoor, would like to convey that today I feel incredibly honored and privileged to have been allowed to extend a vote of thanks on this extremely knowledgeable 5-day FTP on understanding Indian knowledge systems in architecture and planning. So this is a momentous day in our college history as we have hosted this grand FDP with the help of the Council of Architecture Training Research Center Bhopal. On behalf of our organization, Chandigarh University, I would like to extend my sincere thanks to Dr. Navneet Munor for being very kind and supportive in the entire journey to making this event a great success. I pay my wholehearted gratitude to all the eminent speakers and thank them for giving their consent to be part of this FDP and imparting their enriched knowledge to propagate indigenous Indian knowledge system. I further propose a vote of thanks to all the participants participating from different architectural colleges across India and trust that this FDP has added some value to your knowledge. I want to extend my warm regards and heartiest congratulations to our Executive Director, Dr. Anurag Varma, for taking this initiative, and also want to thank the Principal of University Institute of Architecture, Professor Swati, for ensuring her presence always around in smooth conduction. I would never miss the opportunity to thank our college team, our HOD Architect Vikas, my co-coordinator Professor Manojit, and our colleagues for all the extensive exercise done to conduct and organize this FDP. So words would fall short of describing how much knowledge we could derive from this FDP and the important networks we could create. Even though everyone's performance won us over, with a special mention, I thank our management at Chandigarh University, without whom we could not have dreamt of this event. Thank you, university authorities. And I hope we continue to work like this and organize such events in the future for the betterment and upliftment of our faculty and students. Thank you. Namaskar. So I think, sir.
Namaskar. Thank you.
Thank you, Swati ma'am.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Professor Manojit.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Now I request all the participants. So we have already given instruction to you, and we have mentioned all instruction in your email, which you are going to receive at 4:28. And we have mentioned the instruction in the Google form also. In this particular, please keep in your mind, you have to submit, click on the submit button, because in Google form, we are not having facility of auto saving. So please do not forget to click on the button, submit button. And the link will close automatically at 5:30. So do not wait for 5:30. Please submit on or before 5:29. And during this, we are going to close this meeting over here.
Can we have a group photograph?
Yes, ma'am, definitely.
I would like all the participants to switch on their cameras. We wanted to have a group photograph and we want to make it a memory also at the same time. I request everyone to please switch on the camera.
And I wonder if you all like to have blank faces. मतलब सारे students अपना जब मोबाइल बंद कर देते हैं, you prefer it that way. आप सब लोग अपना कैमरा बंद करके बैठे हो. It was as if you were speaking with the wall. And in spite of multiple requests, no one switched on. Do you like students with their camera off when you're teaching online? Just a question on a light-hearted note.
No, sir.
Huh?
No, sir.
No, then why do you treat us this way?
Sir, I didn't.
Oh, not only you, there are so many more. We are all teachers. How can we treat ourselves this way? If I were there, I would not treat you like that, no?
Good to see the women power, sir.
Absolutely, sir. Yes.
Post disable the video, switch on.
I think the men are in the hiding now.
Good to see you.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you once again. Namaskar.
Namaskar.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, all of you.
Right. Thank you so much, Navneet ji. Thanks.
Sir. Thank you, sir. Now we are going to close this meeting over here.
Right, sir.
All the best for your MCQ test.